Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors and guests please stand and remain standing to the Pledge of Allegiance? Representative Jernigan will introduce the chaplain of the day. Representative Jernigan.
Thank you, members. I'm excited. I want to introduce Ms. Richa Patel of the Baptist Hindu Temple from my district in Hermitage, Tennessee. She'll be sharing with us and these three gentlemen here a prayer called the Shanti Path, which is a 2-minute invocation of peace and well-being for all beings of creation. This is an international standard prayer. It's been recited in the White House and in Congress, and we welcome the Baptist Hindu Temple to the People's House, where all faiths and all cultures of 7 million Tennesseans are welcomed. Ms. Patel.
Namaste and good morning. Jai Swaminarayan. It's a great honor and privilege to be here amongst all of you. My name is Richa Patel. With me are Shanbhai Patel, Bhavya Patel, and Turshit Patel, who will be singing the peace prayer today called the Shanti Path. Today with us are also prominent members from other key Hindu organizations of Tennessee, Gujarat Cultural Association, Umayadam, and Gujarat Association of Middle Tennessee. First, I would like to thank Representative Mr. Jernigan for the introduction of BAPS. BAPS stands for Bochasan Basi Shri Akshar Purushottam Swaminarayan Sanstha. BAPS is a spiritual, volunteer-driven faith dedicated to improving society through individual growth by fostering the Hindu ideals of faith, unity, and selfless service. The three main pillars of this Hindu faith that summarize the life of the late Guru Pramukh Swami Maharaj and the current Pramukh Mohan Swami Maharaj are: number 1, in the joy of other lies our own. 2, true spirituality speaks the language of love. And 3, better the world around you by bettering yourself. Universal values of humility, compassion, integrity, and perseverance are the cornerstones of BAPS, along with seva or selfless service to society. Today, BAPS is one of the largest Hindu faiths in the state of Tennessee, with large constitutions throughout in Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. BAPS has organized numerous walkathons, blood drives, health fairs, educational seminars, youth conventions, sports tournaments, addiction-free campaigns, prayers of peace, and many other charitable events throughout our great state. Thus, BAPS today, led by our Guru Mohan Swami Maharaj, has taught us to love, respect, care, and help all. The fundamental principle of Hinduism is ahimsa, meaning nonviolence in thoughts, actions, and speech. With this sentiment in mind, and with the National Day of Prayer coming up very soon on May 4th, 2023, we would like to offer a prayer with all of you there to have infinite and limitless peace, good, light, and enlightenment for all in our great state of Tennessee. We will pray for peace prevailed through in Tennessee, and for all to be blessed with the utmost happiness, success, prosperity, and the best of health. Finally, we'll pray for everyone's well wishes in Tennessee to come true and for great progress of our great state of Tennessee. Let there be peace for all. We will now recite the prayer in Sanskrit and then translate the prayer as well. Thank you.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrutyurma mrutam gamaya. Sarvetra sukhinah santu, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukham apnuyat. Om Dyauh Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Apah Shanti, Aushadayah Shanti, Vishpatayah Shanti, Vishve Devaha Shanti, Brahma Shanti, Sarvam Shanti, Shantireva Shanti, Sama Shantiredhi. Yato yatah samihase tato no abhayam kuru. Shannah kuru prajabhyo भयन्नः पशुभ्यः विश्वाणि देव सवितरेर्दुरिता निपरासुव यद्भद्रं तन्नयासुव ॐ शान्तिः 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 सुशान्तिर्भवतु सर्वारिष्टशान्तिर्भवतु
Om, may peace prevail everywhere. Lead me from the illusion to reality. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to immortality. May all be happy. May all be free of disease. May all see that which is good. May no one suffer. May the heavens be peaceful. May the space in the sky be peaceful. May the earth be peaceful. May the waters be peaceful. May the herbs bring peace. May the trees and plants be peaceful. May the forces of nature be peaceful. May God bring us peace. May everyone be at peace. We pray for peace and only peace. May we realize that peace. Protect us from fear. May the people always be happy. Remove all forms of vice and sorrow. Give us those virtues that are ennobling. Om. May peace prevail everywhere. Thank you so much for your time, love, care, and attention. Namaste and Jai Swaminarayan.
Representative Jernigan will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 92 members present.
Let journal reflect Representative Sparks is excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I request the Sergeant at Arms escort our guests into the chamber.
Mr. Sergeant of Arms, escort the guests to the well, please. Chairman Faison, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the clerk read the resolution.
Mr. Clerk, read the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 473 by Chairman Faison, a resolution to honor, commend, acclaimed songwriter and musician Mitch Rossell. Whereas it is privileged of members of this General Assembly to recognize those Tennesseans who are wholly devoted to their craft and enrich the lives of their fellow citizens through their art. And whereas one such individual is Mitch Rossell, a rising star in country music scene whose prolific songwriting and unique artistry have won over thousands of monthly listeners across streaming services. And whereas as a teenager growing up in East Tennessee, Mitch Rossell played baseball and golf, even winning 3 golf tournaments in the same year before falling in love with writing and performing music. After college, the young artist quickly made the move to Nashville to pursue his dreams. And whereas Mr. Rossell's hard work and dedication paid off when he caught the attention of country music legend Garth Brooks, who invited him to join his 2016 World Tour and his 2022 Stadium Tour as an opening act. And whereas Mr. Rossell impressed the crowds with his acoustic guitar and heartfelt vocals, showcasing his original songs and sharing the stage with Garth Brooks on occasion, singing duets and harmonies with his mentor. And whereas in addition to opening for Mr. Brooks, he also written Garth Brooks' last 4 singles, including #1 song, Ask Me How I Know, which he wrote by himself, and co-writing the follow-up singles, That's What Cowboys Do, All Day Long, and Dive Bar. And whereas the landmark moments have continued for Mr. Rossell, most recently in December 2022 when he received a surprise introduction from Garth Brooks at his Grand Ole Opry debut, where he performed his songs Sun and All I Need to See. And whereas Mr. Rosell's original music continues to capture the hearts of fans across the world, garnering over 91 million all-time streams with songs like 2020 and Ran Into You featuring Trisha Yearwood, which contributed over 39 million streams on Spotify alone. And whereas it is fitting that the members of this General Assembly should honor Tennessee's own Mitch Rosell, a songwriter and musician who has brought much pride to his home state, now therefore be resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that we hereby honor and commend Mitch Rosell for his outstanding achievements as a songwriter and musician, and extend to him our best wishes for continued success in all his future endeavors.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I was elected in this chamber back in 2011. When I got here, I sat in the seat where Mrs. Elaine Davis and Paul Sherrill's sitting right now. And the first person I sat by was this young man right here, Barrett Rich. Representative Rich said he was going to take me under his wing and teach me how to be a representative. Now, I know before you answer that, you're thinking his experiment failed miserably, but he tried his best. And he taught a bunch of us freshmen and became a friend to a lot of us. I came in with the speaker, Ron Williams, several of y'all. Barrett was one of the guys who said, I'm going to be your friend. And he was good. It was awesome to sit beside him, learn the ways of the chamber. He was big time in making sure we did everything right. And since that time, Representative Rich, he retired, went on to do some cool stuff. He works with our parole board, but we've always been friends. 4 or 5 years ago, he called me, he says, Jeremy, have you heard of this musician, Mitch Rosell? I'm like, not yet. He said, I'm going to send you something. Watch this. So he sends me this video and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a real musician right here. Now, y'all don't know this, but I'm a scratch musician, not very good, but I'm good enough to know who's got talent. Even though I don't have a whole lot myself, when I listen to somebody, I know if they're solid musicians. So I was listening to Mitch and hearing some songs that he was writing. The next thing I know, he's touring with Garth Brooks. And for those of y'all don't know, I think Garth Brooks is the greatest musician, entertainer of all time. He's just, in my opinion, he's the very best. So, and I'm saying, all right, Garth Brooks this guy is something neat. Barrett and I were talking one day. I said, I would love to have him on the House floor and just recognize him. And also for y'all to hear, who have not heard his skill, for y'all to hear some of his songs. So, Mr. Speaker, with that introduction and with your indulgence, I would like Mitch Rosell to come and entertain us with a few songs.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Faison. I appreciate it. Is everybody feeling all right this morning? All right. I'm going to play you a couple songs to get out of the way here. As a lot of y'all probably know, being in Nashville, this is a co-writing town. And I wrote this song. It was my first #1 with my favorite co-writer, myself. You're stubborn as they come. You'll never settle down. You'll always be the one who doesn't stick around. You make all the rules. You're set in your ways. You gotta have your freedom, and you gotta have your space. But one day you'll meet the girl you swore you'd never find. Start feeling things you never felt and spending all your time trying to figure out how she got this hold on you. And when you start to fall, you'll hold on to your pride. Start building up your walls and never let her get inside. And you'll push her away, 'cause that's all you know how to do. And then she'll leave, and you won't beg her not to go. Ask me how I know. Go on and shake your head. tell me that I'm wrong, say I'm just another fool, and this is just another song. But I know how you are, 'cause I know how I am, and I'd give anything to go back and try again. 'Cause one day you'll meet the girl you swore you'd never find, start feeling things you never felt, and spending all your time trying to figure out how she got this hold on you. And when you start to fall, you'll hold on to your pride, start building up your walls and never let her get inside. And you'll push her away, 'cause that's all you know how to do. And then she'll leave, and you won't beg her not to go. Ask me how I know. Then you best put this song on repeat. Maybe then you won't end up like me. 'Cause one day you'll meet the girl you swore you'd never find, start feeling things you never felt, and spending all your time trying to figure out how she got this hold on you. And when you start to fall, you'll hold on to your pride, start building up your walls and never let her get inside. You'll push her away, 'cause that's all you know how to do. And then she'll leave, and you won't beg her not to go. Ask me how I know. Ask me how I know. 'Cause man, I know. Thank you very much. You guys want to hear one more? Is that okay? Yeah. So this is a song that I wrote when I was 10 years old. I was woken up in the middle of the night by some noise downstairs, and I went downstairs, and my family was gathered around. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and my grandfather told me that my dad was killed in a car accident. And come to find out that it wasn't just my dad, it was my grandfather and my grandmother-in-law as well. And it was kind of a freak accident. They lived in a small town in East Tennessee, and my dad was in his work van with my grandmother-in-law coming one way. My grandfather was in his truck coming the other way. And a drunk driver hit my grandfather's truck from behind and sent him into my dad's lane, and they hit head on. And it killed all of them except the drunk driver. So it's the reason I started playing guitar was my dad. He always wanted me to play, and so I picked it up right after high school and didn't really have any intentions to do anything like this with it. But I just fell in love with it and wrote a bunch of songs and hundreds of songs, and really struggled to figure out why I never wrote a song about my dad. And I think it was just, I didn't know how to access that. You know, it was just a little too much. And fast forward, I had a son of my own 7 years ago on Monday. And about 6 months after he was born, I wrote this song, and it just came pouring out. So hope you guys like it. My mom was always running, chasing after something. I heard you couldn't tell her nothing when she was 19. She met my daddy and took off in his T-top Chevy. But it went from hot to heavy when they found out about me. Every other weekend was all I got to see. Sometimes he'd come get me and we'd hit Tellico Creek. We'd take that boat and drop it, grab the rods and reels and hop in. He'd open up that tackle box and he'd open up to me. And he'd say, "Son, I hope you know how much I love you. And when you're not with me, I'm always thinking of you. You're the drive inside my heart, the reason I reach for the stars above. He said, my world revolves around you. That's why I call you son. We drive back to his small apartment. It was Hot Wheels on the worn out carpet. We'd play games till the Braves game started. He'd let me stay up late. Time with him was always flying. Sundays never had good time. I'd start to pack and end up crying. And he'd kneel down and say, son, I hope you know how much I love you. And when you're not with me, I'm always thinking of you. You're the drive inside my heart, the reason I reach for the stars above. He said, my world revolves around you. That's why I call you son. Well, I was gonna go live with him, but I guess God had other plans. 'Cause on a 2-lane road on a Tuesday night, a drunk driver crossed that center line. They said my dad didn't feel a thing. Well, I wish I could say the same. 'Cause losing him, it left me cold. I was mad at God, couldn't let it go. And then one blue sky morning, a brown-eyed baby boy was born, and I looked outside and it started pouring. I swear they were daddy's tears. My old man, I could almost see him, and that little face with a new heart beating. The pain in mine started leaving when I whispered in his ear, son, I hope you know how much I love you. Now it all makes sense. This place in life I've come to. You filled the hole inside my heart. You're why I'll reach for the stars above. My world revolves around you. That's why I call you son. Yeah, that's why I call you son. Thank you.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you join us in the well? And any of y'all who just love country music like I do, would y'all join us in the well with a picture with my friend Mitch?
Welcoming and honoring Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Mr. Bahadrish Patel. His daughter served as our pastor, the chaplain of the day, and very proud of all of his accomplishments. He's a very successful businessman here in Middle Tennessee, and we're pleasure to have him join us today in the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Each one of us members get an opportunity to have some amazing people that work with us in our offices. And today I want to wish a special happy birthday to my legislative analyst by day and law student by night, Marissa King. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to honor the men and women and children that linked arms yesterday. There were over 9,000 citizens of Tennessee that linked arms, calling on this body to act, to do something about the gun violence in our state. And it was the most powerful thing I've been a part of, to see children, moms, dads. It was amazing. And to all of you that were there, I know several people from this body were there yesterday. Thank you for being part of what I believe to be a historic event, and hopefully the move that pushes us over the line to act. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Dixie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to wish our Metro Nashville Public Schools students well as they start their second day of TCAP testing. I hope they do really well today and this week and next week.
Thank you. Chairman Clemens. Pass. Any further welcome and honoring? Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since we're nearing the end of session, I wanted to recognize the transportation intern. I believe she's in the gallery somewhere. Paula Santiago. There she is, waving. She's been a joy and a real asset to the committee, and congratulations on her passing the LSAT. She may be headed to law school.
All right. Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know my dad's probably watching today, and today is his birthday. He had a stroke about a month ago or so, and we're very blessed to have him. So I just want to say happy birthday, Dad.
Thank you. All right, next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction to resolutions.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions properly filed be introduced pursuant to Rule number 17 or placed on the consent calendar or referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory memorializing.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory memorialized in line of that be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions lying over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 1,581 be introduced and passed on first consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on first consideration.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that Senate Bills 4, 361, 978, 1,038, 1,100, 1,147, and 1,274 transmitted by the Senate be held on the desk pending third consideration of their companion House bills.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on second consideration, House bills on second consideration, petitions and memorials, reports from standing committees, reports from select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has 2 consent calendars.
Chairman Zachary, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of consent calendar 1 and 2 on third and final consideration, keeping with Rule 50.
Gentleman moves passage of consent calendar 1 and 2. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, any objections?
Mr. Speaker, on House consent calendar number 2, item 2, House Bill 654 has been objected to by Chairman Clemens, Item 9 on consent calendar 2, House Bill 634, has been objected to by Clemmons. Item 10, House Bill 170, has been objected to by Chairman Clemmons. Item 11, House Bill 592, has been objected to by Chairman Clemmons.
All right, anyone seeking recognition on consent calendar? Representative Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on item 24, I've spoken with both leaders. Item 24, SJR 0556. All those voting in the affirmative be listed as co-prime sponsors with Shelby County delegation listed first.
Representative Miller, is that consent calendar 1, just for verification?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, without objection, exclusions duly noted. Representative Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Item number, I think, 67. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. Item number 27, Senate Joint Resolution 560, request that all members of the Knox County delegation be listed as co-prime sponsors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's on consent calendar 1. Without objection, exclusions duly noted. Anyone else seeking recognition? See none, we're voting. All the members in favor vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 96, no nays.
Having received a constitutional majority, I declare the consent calendar passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a regular calendar.
Mr. Clerk, do you want to tell them which calendar we're on?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the motion made during the last session, we're picking up on Monday's regular calendar. Item 26 would be the first item on that calendar. For those who are using dashboard in the chamber and those that are following along in the public, if you will go back to Monday's date and dashboard, you will be able to find this calendar. And once again, Mr. Speaker, we will be starting with item 26.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized. Oh, Mr. Clerk, sorry.
That's House Bill 662 by Representative Hicks, relative to education. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 967.
Representative Hicks moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 967, probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 967 on third and final consideration.
Representative Hicks moves passage of Senate Bill 967 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the same as the Senate amendment, so I move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendment.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill accomplishes two things. First, it allows an LEA the option to maintain only the notice of deleted policies in the LEA's central office instead of the library. Second is it allows a person with an active industry license or credential, let's say a plumber, electrician, or a heat and air guy, to provide instruction in a CTE classroom, but only if the instruction is supervised by a licensed teacher who will be the teacher of record for the course. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I renew my motion.
Representative Hicks renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 967 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays.
Senate Bill 967, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 663 by Representative Hicks relative to K-12 education. Mr. Speaker, Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 966.
Representative Hicks moves to substitute and form Senate Bill 966, probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 966 on third and final consideration.
Representative Hicks moves passage of Senate Bill 966 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chairman White moves adoption of House Amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under current law, when library materials are challenged, it must go before the local school board of education or the charter school governing body for a decision. This bill does not change that. What the bill does is it allows for an administrative level stop with the LEA or the charter school to see if a resolution can be reached. If no resolution is reached, then it goes to the local school board or charter governing body for that decision. That is simply all that this bill does. And I renew my motion.
Representative Hicks renews this motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, with the sponsor yield.
Representative Hicks.
Yes, sir.
Representative Beck.
This sort of sounds like you're asking for a mediation period to resolve the conflict. Is that the mechanism that this bill is bringing forth?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, currently, it's my understanding that a lot of LEAs are currently actually doing it this route. They have set up a committee in the local LEAs. This bill is just simply clarifying that that is okay, and it gives a level stop because some of these questions could be very simple. Some of them could be really handled in a very easily way. And what this is doing is just really clarifying that they can do that.
Representative Beck.
Very good. It's a great idea. And in courts of law, mediations and breaks like this often lead to settlements and being able to save a lot of time and money. So thank you for bringing this.
Thank you. Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker and sponsor. This has to do with books as well, this legislation. What's the mediation going to be about?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear the last part of your question. I apologize.
Representative Pearson.
What is it that the LEAs or the schools would be mediating?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They would be mediating maybe challenges by a parent or a teacher or even a student, I guess, that maybe the book had content or something that wasn't appropriate. It could be many things that could be mediated. It could be just a very simple question on a book. So that's the reason that this bill only addresses how that mechanism can work.
Representative Pearson.
In reading this legislation, one of the things that was concerning is there's a creation, or to your point, the clarification of a process. For instance, if someone wants to ban a book that they find for any reason not to be worthwhile for their children to read. And we've talked about the types of books that too often are on that list because of race or sexual orientation and things like that. But what is the process if there's another person who disagrees that complaint is nefarious or is asinine and this shouldn't even be being heard? How are you including voices of dissension in this process?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the resolution can't be met in the local LEA, let's say if it gets to a point to where it needs to go to the local school board or the local charter board, then that's where that would go. If it can't be resolved, it will still be able to go to elected officials where it should go. And that's how that mechanism would work. It's just a level stop. That's all this bill does, is a level stop. It may be a simple solution that doesn't need to wait 30, 45 days to go to a school board. It could be answered right there in a simple way. And I think it'll really make things easier. They're actually already doing this process.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you for that. And I think as a part of the clarification, where the board or the school, where the intention lies is really important, because I really don't think we ultimately want elected leaders who may not be educators themselves to be determining what type of books supposed to be in schools because of some objections of one or two or a few people. And so again, I caution us from engaging and involving in educational matters elected officials who may not be proximate to the realities of the educational needs and curriculum of young people.
Representative Hicks.
I renew my motion.
Representative Lynn. Pass. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hicks, thank you for bringing this legislation. It brings clarity. A lot of times we don't need to go all the way to the board and on a public issue. Things are not what they seem, and so it can be headed off kind of at the pass early on. And so thank you for bringing clarity.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes through life, simple is better. With that, I renew my motion.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Objection. Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 966 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 88, non-nays, one present, unvoted.
Senate Bill 966, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1484 by Chairman Halsey, relative to inmates infected with bloodborne pathogens. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Halsey.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Speaker. This amendment improves upon the amendment also notifying the DA. Oh.
That's what you. Chairman Halsey, I think we would like to have you in the well if you'd like to come down. House Bill 1484. All right. Chairman Halsey, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927.
Chairman Halsey moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 927 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Halsey moves passage of Senate Bill 927 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keisling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 1 is the same as the Senate amendment. We move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 2 by Chairman Halsey. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. I move for a consideration of amendment number 2.
All right, members, so since this is an untimely filed amendment, we have to vote to see. Representative Powell, you have a question on point of order?
Mr. Speaker, if the sponsor could give an explanation for this amendment, that would be helpful.
Chairman Halsey, you get a minute to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It adds 3 words. In the original bill, it said that we could access federal funds for HIV treatment. This also adds 3 words, or state funds.
So since it's untimely, we're voting to have to make it timely in order to be considered. So this is for consideration. So you heard the motion. There was discussion. We're voting for consideration of Amendment 2. All those in favor of considering Amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Holsley, aye. All those in favor, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does anyone wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 91, 4 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having received the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider Amendment number 2 prevails. We are on Amendment number 2. Chairman Holsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, when you added this amendment, that had just added 3 words that in this bill, we could access either federal funds or state funds to treat IV patients or HIV patients that are incarcerated in county jails. I move to adopt.
Chairman Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chairman Holsey, is the requirement for the addition of these 3 words because our governor callously and offensively refused federal funding for HIV?
Chairman Holsey.
I don't know about the callously and offensively, but there was some transactions on federal funds. Yes, sir.
Chairman Clemens.
So this, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this would allow us to tap into state funds to replace those federal funds for which Tennessee taxpayers are also paying their money. So again, we're going to be double billed for the same services for individuals in the state of Tennessee because the governor refused federal funding for HIV.
Chairman Holsey.
I don't know all the ins and outs of that, to be quite frank with you, but yes, this allows us to go for other monies to treat these people.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Holsey has moved adoption of Amendment number 2. Parking seconded. Any discussion further on the amendment? Seeing none. We are voting. We're on the board. All those in favor of Amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change your vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 95, 4 nays.
Amendment number 2 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Holsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the long and short of this is all county jails generally have state prisoners, but they also have county prisoners, and the county jail is responsible for the health needs and the medical needs of inmates. And right now, the cost of medicine for somebody who's HIV in a county jail costs around $3,500 a month. That's breaking the back of a lot of county jails. So this bill, up to this point, we'd had no mechanism to access some of this money for treatment. And what this bill does, it allows county jails to apply for money either through Ryan White or through state funds to help offset some of the cost of HIV treatment. And that's the bill.
Chairman Holsey renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the sponsor yield?
Chairman
Thank
Holsey.
you. So I usually have a habit of, if bills come through my committee or subcommittee, I try to address those concerns in the committee and leave questions for other people on the floor that might not have had the privilege of hearing those bills. But this is an exception. This actually came through our committee and subcommittee and asked the same questions and expressed the same concerns and have yet to be satisfied with an answer of both either the Department of Corrections or the Department of Health. And here's my concern. As the bill is written, it would remove the requirement that these drugs and these treatments be provided. And my concern with that is, in some of our communities, it could be interpreted that those counties would not have to provide their inmates with these drugs. And let me be clear here. We've made a lot of progress when it comes to treating HIV and AIDS. I'm disappointed with the administration and them taking a step back and not accepting these federal funds. But the issue becomes, if you have someone who's an inmate and they are taking these drugs, clearly they are in close confines with other inmates, and they don't have access to these drugs, they can go from having HIV to full-blown AIDS. That is going to bring a major expense on all of our communities. And I get that these drugs are expensive, they're costly, but overall they help prevent a further spread and a further increase from HIV to AIDS. And so I've asked again and again why, and I haven't gotten a sufficient answer, why we have to remove that requirement, because I'm all for trying to access federal funds. The CDC, as you know, has offered us federal funds. For some reason, as a state, the administration has decided to reject those federal funds. But when you have prisoners that are in the jail system and they don't have access to the drugs that can help keep them alive, to help keep them from spreading this disease amongst other inmates and amongst the population in general, that is why that requirement exists. And so when we remove that requirement, it's very concerning to me. And then the other thing is, these grants, the money doesn't even cover the general population. Let's remove the inmates. Let's just look at the general population. The Ryan White funds, the money that's available, if you look, I think it's $27 million maybe. That money, if we decide to accept it and want to get it, it's not going to even cover the general population. Now we are further depleting that money that's available to the general public and trying to dispense that amongst these county jails. So these have been my concerns, and again, sponsor, and I did tell you in committee, just to be clear to everybody in this chamber, that I was going to raise these same issues because I've raised them again in sub and full and have yet to get a sufficient response. I voted yes for the amendment because I do think we should even be applying for state funds if we can, but I still have major reservations about this bill because, again, we are removing that requirement for these drugs to be given. And we're leaving this up to, I don't know whose determination it is. And my concern, again, is that in some counties and some jails, the warden, whoever, could decide they don't have to provide these important medical treatments to these inmates. So if the sponsor could address my question, why are we removing the requirement that these drugs be given?
Chairman Halsey.
The bill doesn't remove that requirement. A jail under existing law in Tennessee has to provide medical care and medicine for inmates. You have to do that. Nobody else can do that, and you're required by law to do it. So the bill's focus doesn't remove any of those requirements that's already in existing law. But the way the law was written before, there was no way to access any money for this particular treatment. So this bill says if there's money left over in state funds or federal funds, then jails can access that. That's the whole focus of the bill, not to remove responsibility for health care for inmates, medicine or otherwise.
Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker, and good morning, Chairman. I think you just cleared one of my questions, but I want to be absolutely certain. Is there a requirement for the jails and the prisons to deliver adequate medical care, including these HIV treatments, if appropriate?
Chairman Halsey.
Yes, sir, it is. It's a responsibility of a jail to do that.
Representative Hardaway.
All right, thank you. In the you spoke to funds being left over. If there are not adequate funds that are left over, what's the funding source for delivering adequate medical care at that time to the prison system?
Chairman Holsey.
It will remain the same as it is right now. The jail has to provide it.
Representative Hardaway.
All right, so in no way are we, if we vote for this bill, in no way are we violating the constitutional rights of these inmates.
Chairman Holsey.
Not at all. In my particular jail in my county, they have 2 inmates that have HIV. It costs my county $7,000 a month to treat those 2 inmates. They will still keep treating those 2 inmates as long as they need to. This tries to find another funding source to help pay for that.
Representative Hardaway.
Okay, so if we don't vote for this bill, the funding would have to come through another source, but there would be funding.
Chairman Holsey.
That's correct.
Representative Hardaway.
All right, thank you. I think I can support the bill.
Representative Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to clarify this remark about callous behavior. The reason those funds were refused by our state to receive them from the federal government is that part of that funding was assigned and meant for Planned Parenthood. So money that comes from the federal government can have strings attached, and some of them are hidden, some of them are apparent. But that, I understand, was the reason for refusing that funding. It was not to refuse to treat patients, and I think along with that statement was clearly stated that funding for the treatment will continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor, just a question here. I'm reading, this amendment exempts the county legislative bodies from having to provide for federally funded medication for HIV positive patients. Is that still in the bill?
Chairman Holsey.
I'm not sure I understood what part is still in the bill. Ask me one more time.
Representative Pearson.
It's related to Amendment 1. It says this amendment exempts the county legislative bodies from having to provide for federally funded medication for HIV positive patients. Is that in this legislation?
Chairman Holsey.
I don't think so.
Chairman.
May I roll this to the end of the calendar and get some explanations?
Yeah, without objection, roll to the Hill. To the Hill of Monday's calendar. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1254 by Chairman Kiesling, relative to elections. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Kiesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1007 on third and final consideration.
Chairman.
Forgive me, Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1007.
Chairman Kiesling moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1007, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Kiesling.
And again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of SB 1007 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Kiesling moves passage of Senate Bill 1007 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate amendment, rule to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Kiesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 1254 or Senate Bill 1007 is is a very simple and improvement, elections improvement cleanup bill, actually. There's a couple of, or 3 points then I want to mention in section 1. It removes the directive that allows the voter's social security number to be part of the voter's information sent to the poll. So anyways, that eliminate that. And 2, it simply makes it permissive that the voter is able to sign the printed application that's printed from the electronic poll book. And then finally, 3, the savings is quite substantial. At one point, the primary ballots were printed on different color papers, so this will eliminate that, and it'll be all white paper. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll entertain any questions. And I might add, Mr. Speaker, that this has been vetted through 5 committees. So anyway, but with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Chairman Keesler news his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1007 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Seeing member which change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays.
Senate Bill 1007 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. The most read serious table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 329 by Chair Lady Moody and others relative to wages. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 0281.
Chair Lady Moody moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 281, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chair Lady Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 0281 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Moody moves passage of Senate Bill 281 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment number 2.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to roll this to the hill of the amendments.
Without objection, roll to the hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would remove Section 2 from the bill. Section 2 from this bill includes a prohibition where school districts would be prohibited from deducting professional dues from teachers' paychecks. This amendment would eliminate or remove from the bill that prohibition. Move to adopt.
I got y'all. I got it. Vice Chairman Baum moves adoption of amendment number 2, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? There's objection. Representative Sapicki, you'd like to be recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, members, I support this bill in its original form. This bill went through tremendous debate in the Education Administration Subcommittee and the Education Administration Full Committee. That is the body that's entrusted with this type of legislation to direct policy to be heard on the floor. This amendment came from the Finance Committee, okay? The section of the bill that the Finance Committee is trying to remove is financially not significant, which is outside the purview of the Finance Committee. When this portion of the bill was removed in the Finance Committee, the financial part of the bill did not change, which means this portion being removed under this amendment is financially not significant, which means that doesn't fall under the purview of the Finance Committee. Now, either we believe in the committee system and the lanes that we all stay in, or we don't. And we'd be setting a dangerous precedent here on policy that another committee that does not have the purview on that policy because it does not fall under what their direction is to start amending legislation before it gets to the House floor. I'm asking you that you vote this amendment down, and we debate the bill in its original form as was sent forth by the Education Administration Committee for their consideration. With that, Mr. Speaker, I make a motion to lay this amendment on the table.
That's a proper motion, proper seconded. The parliamentary, I got it. The parliamentary situation is that Representative Moody has moved, or Vice Chairman Baum has actually moved amendment number 2. Representative Sapicki has moved that motion to the table. That cuts off all debate except for that of the sponsor, which is Vice Chairman Baum. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me make 2 comments. The Finance Committee, or a majority of the members on that committee, felt like the 2 sections of this bill should be separated. The first section deals with a pay increase for teachers. The second section involves this prohibition prohibiting LEAs from deducting professional dues from teachers' paychecks. The Finance Committee felt like those were 2 separate issues and should be in 2 separate bills. And I should also add that teachers would be the only state employees that would be prohibited from having their professional dues deducted automatically. Firefighters, police officers, other state employees, other public employees would still have that option. And so by adopting this amendment or voting not to put it on the table, it would eliminate that prohibition, Section 2, from this bill. Finance would ask that you vote against laying the amendment on the table.
The parliamentary situation is Vice Chairman Baum has moved adoption of amendment number 2. Representative Sapicki has moved that motion to the table. We are voting on the tabling motion. All those in favor, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 45, 50 nays.
The tabling motion fails. We are on All right, members, so we are back on amendment number 2. Any discussion on the amendment? See none. We're going to put it on the board since there was objection to the tabling. So all those in favor of adopting amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 51, 45 nays.
Amendment number 2 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to the heel of the amendments. House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment 2.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Chairman White moves adoption of amendment number 1, probably seconded. Leader Camper, you have a question? Leader Camper. Chairman White, you're recognized.
I think we'll have the debate and have a vote on it.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe we're on the correct move to adopt Amendment 1. Is that correct? We're on Amendment 1?
We're on Amendment 1. Is that your motion to adopt Amendment 1?
That is correct. Move to adopt Amendment 1.
Chairman White moves adoption of Amendment number 1 properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we get clarity on what this amendment will do, and if we vote for it, the position the legislation will be in, and if we vote against it as compared to what we just voted on? Can we get an explanation of that, please?
Chairman White? Chairman White, would you explain what the amendment does so that there's a question about what your amendment does?
And I have the sponsor correct me if I'm wrong. What this amendment was, we're back on Amendment 1. And Amendment 1 is the original bill that came out of the committee, which is in original form, the teacher pay increase, and with the removal of the payroll deduction.
Representative Hurt.
So to be clear, voting for this amendment puts it back in the original shape and removes what we just did. Voting against Amendment 1 will put it in the shape with the amendment we just put on it. It will leave it in that form. Is that correct?
Chairman White?
That is, as I understand it. Yes, sir.
Right, just to be clear, let's try to be very clear here. The Amendment 2 that was adopted took out the TEA dues from being payroll deducted. Amendment 1 that is before us would put the TEA dues back in, meaning they could not be payroll deducted. All right. Just trying to make it clear. Representative Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, let me repeat that again. The current amendment that was in the bill with TEA dues being deducted from payroll. Amendment number 2 that was adopted would allow those dues to continue to be payroll deducted. Amendment 1 would go back and would not allow the dues to be payroll deducted. The first time. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly right, and it does make the bill. So you are correct.
Thank you. Discussion on amendment number 1. Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to put this a little bit more plainly is we would essentially, by adopting this amendment, be discriminating against teachers. Aside, in different from any other profession, we're going to put a restriction on them that wouldn't apply to any other profession. I mean, that's very clear what we're doing. This is a sweeper amendment, bad amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lear Lambert.
So as usual, I'll strongly disagree with my friend from Davidson County, and he's definitely twisted the issue. This bill includes teacher pay raises. I don't know a person on this floor that doesn't support teachers. There is an organization that is allowed to do something that very few organizations are allowed to do, and that is to do wage withdrawals for their dues. This may affect that organization, but I know hundreds and hundreds of teachers that are not a member of that organization. So to say that somehow or another this is against teachers just because there's a National Education Association that doesn't stand for anything that my teachers in my county stand for, to try to paint this like that is completely disingenuous. So let's fight about the amendment. We can discuss whether or not one organization can do dues deduction, and I don't think any of them should be allowed to do dues deduction from their wages, and I think that's a conversation we should continue to have. So we're dealing with one organization now, but dues deductions are a thing of the past. You can do a credit card, you can use bank account withdrawals, you can do just about any other way. You can send us a check in the mail still. I'm sure many of us still use checks, but you can Venmo it if you'd like. We're just dealing with wage deduction in this particular bill. Now, we just voted on this on the other amendment. I don't know if it'll turn out any different in this one, but I want to be really clear. A vote either direction on this is about whether or not an organization gets dues deduction. It has nothing to do whether or not you support your teachers, because this bill includes teacher pay raises, and so will the budget we discuss later.
Representative Johnson of Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a lot of teachers that don't belong to the association, but all of the teachers I've spoken to want this prohibition intact so that they can get their dues deducted, just like police, firefighters, and other employees. So just because teachers aren't members, they still support having payroll deduction.
Representative Hicks of Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's a couple of things I guess I want to address. And first of all, let me talk about when a bill comes through a committee. What got put on in budget sub was proper. What got put on stripped out section 2. That was proper. There was nothing shady about doing that. And if that's not good enough, after it went to budget sub, it went to full. It got stronger. Guess what stayed out? Section 2. So not only did budget sub say this bill should be about $125 million for our teachers, it said we're going to keep it focused on our teachers. Here's what's interesting about dues deduction. We all say we're about local control. Guess what the bill does as it currently is, not the bill, but the way that it's structured right now. Not only does the LEA get to decide whether or not they want to do dues, the teachers get to decide if they want their dues taken out. So let's keep this about $125 million pay increase for our teachers that we can all get up and go back and brag about. Let's keep section 2. If somebody wants to bring a bill next year and keep this separate, but let's just do this. Let's make sure that we're even across the board. As Chairman Baum said, the state actually takes dues out for different organizations. Let's just be fair about this. Let's be able to go home and brag to our teachers that we gave them $125 million. Let's keep this out. We've already voted once. Let's be consistent. And I just ask you, with that, I move to lay Amendment 1 on the table.
That's a proper motion. Proper seconded. There was objection, but we are where we are. All right. The parliamentary situation is that Chairman White has moved adoption of Amendment number 1. Chairman Hicks has moved that motion to the table. That cuts off all debate except for that of the sponsor. Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I apologize to the body for the little bit of confusion as we go through these amendments. Amendment 1 is the original bill that came before the Education Administration Committee, as Representative Sapiki was referring to. It gives the $125 million pay raise to the teachers. But included in that bill was that we would remove any organization from being able to deduct dues from our teachers as is currently done. So that's the bill in its original form. The body will have to make its choice at this point. This particular issue has been before Education Administration for the past 3 or 4 years. And so I think it's time to solve it one way or the other. But if you vote for Amendment 1, then you're voting for the original bill as it came through Education Administration Committee before it got to Finance that had that Amendment 2 on there. I believe I am correct on that, Madam Sponsor. And with that, I renew the motion.
All right, well, we're in the parliamentary situation. Chairman White has moved adoption of Amendment number 1. Chairman Hicks has moved that motion to the table. Let's be clear. We are voting on the tabling motion. All those in favor, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 46, 52 nays, 1 present, unvoted.
The tabling motion fails. We are back on Amendment number 1. All right. I was just making sure I got where I'm needing. We're on amendment number 1. Any further discussion? We are voting. We will be on the board. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 53, 46 nays.
Amendment number 1 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chair Lady Moody renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Chair, what's going to happen in the future in our individual counties when we pass along and implement a pay increase to a minimum of $50,000 starting pay on, I believe it's year 5? How are they going to pay for that at that point? Thank you.
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
I'm sorry, Representative, will you please repeat your question?
Representative Campbell.
I'll just rephrase it. Will local governments have to raise taxes potentially to pay for this pay increase in 5 years?
Chair Lady, Leader Lamberth.
Short answer, no. So we are raising the minimum teacher pay and we're raising the teachers' salaries. So every single local community has to make the same type of budgetary decisions that we make here. We are also putting in a significant amount of money. We have literally put in $3 billion plus additional dollars for K through 12 education in the past decade, and we'll continue to do that. If this body ever decides to reverse that course and cut back the amount of money the state's sending, then it could put local communities in a difficult position. But simply paying teachers more for the hard work that they put in does not in any way put local communities in a position where they would have to raise taxes.
Representative Campbell.
So legislative intent is that we will intend to continue funding this for years to come and not pass this on to the locals.
Leader Lamberth.
Absolutely.
Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Just to clarify, the amendment, the anti-union amendment that was added as a part of this bill? It was just a lot of conversation and vote. I just want to make sure that's what's a part of this bill now.
Leader Lamberth.
The bill is in the posture that came over from the Senate. So the amendment that Chairman White put forward passed on the board. So that amendment is on the bill, sir. However you'd like to characterize it, but yes, it is on the bill.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. Some of you don't know this. My mother, Dr. Kimberly Owens Pearson, she's been a teacher over 20 years. I believe in our teachers being well compensated for the very hard work that they do in our schools, just as educators, to ensure that the next generation of people in our state are given the tools and the knowledge that they need in order to be successful. What is harrowing here is the decision to tie teachers' pay, who should be getting paid more, who deserve to be getting paid more, to an effort to hurt unionization in our state. When we know that the ability of people to reach the middle class, the ability of folks to engage in our society, to see economic justice in many ways has come from the ability of organizations and institutions to work in a way that fights for higher wages, better pay, things like this. This is really important to me in particular because in Shelby County right now, we've got sanitation workers who are on strike because of the unsafe working conditions, the mistreatment that they're experiencing and things like that. And so it's really sad to see such a good effort and intention of having teachers' pay increase being tied to an effort that reduces folks' ability to engage collaboratively in unionization efforts. And that is not the way that our state should be going. That's not the work of justice. That's not what this legislative body should be doing. And so it's just really disappointing to see this happening in this way.
Out of order. Balcony, that's the one warning. You cannot have an outburst. Please refrain from disrupting the session. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. To the bill sponsor, was there motivation for, and I can't see the sponsor, there she is. Was there motivation for the part of the bill? I know there was motivation, no doubt, from all of the teachers for the actual raises in salary. But was there any motivation from the community, teachers community, the education community, for actually, and I'm going to say something about Tiger in a minute if he doesn't sit down somewhere. All right, but was there any motivation for putting the additional part in the bill that would do away with the ability to have payroll deduction for membership dues?
Chair Lady Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill came from the governor, and I committed to him to carry it intact. So there was no motivation except for how it was presented to be carried from the governor's office. And I'd also like to remind you all that while the TEA has been singled out, it covers any of our professional teaching organizations in Tennessee. And if you'll go on the TEA and PET websites, they already have their apps set up. They're using the wording "need to change the way you pay dues." Change now, pay your dues now through the app. They've been encouraging their members to do that. So it's just freeing up our locals where it is, before this bill will pass, where the locals are doing that for them. It frees up our LEAs and those people that are doing that right now to do other things, and lets each member of whichever organization deduct the dues the way it's convenient for them through the app or through their bank.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I heard reference earlier from someone in your leadership that there should be a bill next year to address the deductions that are coming out of the fire and police and those unions. Is that the goal, to start that process?
Chair Lady Moody.
That is not my intent. I have no knowledge of that, but that's not the intent of this.
Representative Hardaway.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I still oppose the bill. I think that those in my community are satisfied with the way, the convenience of having that payroll deduction available to them. And I don't think we need to get into that business. I think that we need to let the local folks, as you heard one of your, someone in your leadership say earlier, stay out of the local folks' business when they can handle it better, when they have a better sense of what their local folks want, what the teachers want in those LEAs that we represent. And my LEAs have not come to me and said that we don't want to do this. So I wish it was permissive, but I thank you for your responses.
Chair Lady Moody.
Thank you, and I'll remind you, the best local control is individuals, so that's what this provides.
Representative Hardaway.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, ma'am.
You said, thank for your
Surely.
comments, and the best local control is by the individuals controlling.
Representative Johnson and Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is very frustrating. I know that our teachers desperately deserve a raise, but their wishes are also that payroll reduction or deduction remains. We brought DCS employees up to 50,000 this year, and that's such a great, amazing, and needed thing. We're talking about, 5 years down the road before we get there. Currently, teachers are making less today than they did 10 years ago when you consider cost of living. I'm curious. I think that there's every likelihood that by the time we get to 50,000, that's not going to keep up with cost of living either. It sounds like a lot right now, but we should be doing this today, and we should be maintaining payroll deduction because that is what the teachers want, whether they belong to PET or TEA or any of those organizations. And so I feel like this poison pill in this bill is just another way that this legislature has attacked our teachers, and it's another thing that's going to push them out. And so I think we should honor teachers. I think that we should give them the raise they so desperately deserve, but without the dig at them.
Out of order. Last warning. Last warning. We do not want to have to clear the balcony, but you cannot disrupt the proceedings from the balcony. Lear Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I join my colleague from Knox County in what most of us have done over the last several years. This body has added nearly $3 billion in new education dollars since 2011. We've increased the per pupil average spending by more than $3,000. And we've supported our teachers to the tune of $861 million in salary increases over those years. We cannot, we should not, and we will not stop now. And I want to thank the leadership of this body because the majority of you have voted for most of those budgets. A few have not, but most have and have supported these teachers just like this bill does. So we cannot stop now. We will not stop now. We should continue to step forward just as we have since 2011.
Representative Johnson Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those steps are tiny. It sounds like a lot of money when you add it all together over the years, but we're talking about tens of thousands of teachers. And you can look at a teacher's paycheck and you can see that for each individual teacher, that does not amount to a lot. And so it sounds like big dollars, you all, but we're not keeping up with the rest of the country. We're not even keeping up with the rest of the Southeast. And this is a disservice.
Lear Lambert.
Well, I guess we've come to that point, but when you start saying $3 billion is inconsequential, I guess we've entered a different reality.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, that is a lot of money. But let's talk about when that's divided up across the entire state of Tennessee over years. Look at the teacher's paycheck today compared to 10 years ago. It is a lot of money, but it's not very much money at all in their paychecks.
Lear Lambert. Anybody? Nope. Pass. Representative McCalman, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 281 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 98, nays.
Senate Bill 281 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection to the most series table. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1459 by Chair Lady Moody and others relative to criminal offenses. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1056.
Chair Lady Moody moves to substitute and conform Senate Bill 1056, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Chair Lady Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1056 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Moody moves passage of Senate Bill 1056 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate amendment improves upon this amendment by also notifying the DA that originally prosecuted the inmate. Therefore, I move to withdraw House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment 1.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. What this bill will do as amended, it will require all jails and prisons to report certain violent and sexual offenses committed by an inmate to the appropriate district attorney within 5 business days. It authorizes the court to sentence an inmate consecutively for offenses committed while incarcerated. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I renew my motion.
Chair Lady Moody renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor, would you yield for a few questions?
Chair Lady Moody.
Yes, Representative.
Representative Pearson.
Do you have examples where this legislation has been passed and it has helped to reduce recidivism, prevented criminality, had any benefit to the people who are incarcerated?
Chair Lady Moody.
Representative, I don't have that information. I just know from hearing from our corrections officials here in Tennessee how much this is needed.
Representative Pearson.
Can you tell people, we've got folks from our district and people obviously here in the gallery, what's the difference between a sentence happening concurrently versus consecutively?
Chair Lady Moody.
I don't know. Could I call a friend?
Leader Lambert, would you? The question was the difference between consecutive and concurrent sentencing. Leader Lambert.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. This particular member's been up a lot, and I was not paying attention. I should have, sir. The question was the difference between concurrent or consecutive sentencing. Concurrent sentencing runs at the same time. Consecutive sentencing would run one after the other. So if a person received a 1-year sentence and a 1-year sentence concurrently, then it would be a 1-year sentence. If they receive a 1-year sentence and a 1-year sentence consecutively, then it would in essence be a 2-year sentence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pearson.
Yes, and so interesting. On this bill that you're putting before us, it talks about serving multiple sentences consecutively. And so I think it's really important that we understand, and you understand, the effect of that would be extending people's time in prison, which you have shared. We don't have any evidence that that's going to do any benefit either for the people who are incarcerated, the folks who are in prison, or anyone outside. And I'm so shocked that it states that this will have no significant cost. But in order for someone to go back to court, a district attorney general to receive this information, to go to court, to have a hearing, and for a judge to decide on any of these cases, there won't be a significant cost, at least from what the fiscal note here says. So how many people today would fit under this legislation if it's passed?
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
I don't have that number, and I don't set the fiscal note.
Representative Pearson.
Okay, so potentially we could say if it's not significant, maybe this applies to one person. But the premise of what's being put forward by this legislative body is finding ways to be more punitive, finding ways to extend people's incarceration with consecutive sentencing. But I didn't see, and I wonder if you have this in this legislation, resources about prevention and ways that we would be helping to actually rehabilitate people who are incarcerated. Is that in this legislation, or is it strictly punitive?
Chair Lady Moody.
It's not in this legislation. This is for our corrections officials where they are having felonies and misdemeanors committed upon them while they are working.
Representative Pearson.
Yes, and I see the spectrum, and for people who are watching, you go from criminally negligent homicide all the way to indecent exposure. Is a huge array of things that a person could potentially do in order to fall under this. In the wardens that you spoke with, did they agree that they wanted to have a potential violation end up with them having a misdemeanor?
Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to renew my motion. We're getting in the minutia, and the bill is as I've stated.
Representative Pearson.
Yes, indeed, because what's in the minutia matters. If you go to Amendment Number 1, Section 3, it says a violation of one above is a Class A misdemeanor, which would mean a warden or chief administrative officer employed by a penal institution who knows that an offense enumerated in 2 but did not notify the district attorney within 5 business days would commit a Class A misdemeanor. And so I'm wondering if wardens too want to be a part of the punitive nature of this body. That's the minutia, and that's really important for us to do as legislators.
Representative Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the sponsor for running the bill. This came out of an ad hoc committee we had this past summer. And the reason the bill's here is because we found out that there was quite a bit of crime going on in institutions and it wasn't being reported to the local DA. So this bill fixes that and says if you commit crime in prison, there are certain crimes that are going to be reported to the DA. Whether he prosecutes or not's his own business. He doesn't have to do that. If he does, it allows the judge to run this consecutive. It doesn't force him to do that. The indecent exposure is an issue if it's intended to harass and intimidate a prison guard, then that's why that's in there too. So it's a good bill, and I'm glad you're here.
Chair Lady Moody.
Thank you for that explanation.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the sponsor, thank you for carrying this bill. As probably one of the only or few that have worked in the Department of Corrections over my long working career and experience, I appreciate what you're trying to do for those good men and women. I appreciate that coddling criminals will only increase criminal behavior. And I appreciate the fact that reporting that protects those good men and those good women that we have working in those institutions who do a necessary job because of the criminal behavior of those people who are there. I know that's not easy for you, but thank you again. I just wanted to give you my thanks.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, sponsor, for this legislation. One of the issues that was brought to me immediately after being elected were some of the issues that this legislation addresses because I have a state prison in my district. And we have got to hold these inmates accountable for their actions, regardless of what it is. And so I appreciate this legislation and would encourage everyone to support it. Thank you.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My previous question.
Previous question's been called. The objection. There's objection. We're voting on previous question. All those in favor of previous question vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 72, 21 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1056 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 74, 20 nays.
Senate Bill 1056, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1380 by Chairman Reagan, relative to prohibiting minor consent to vaccination. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1111.
Chairman Reagan moves to substitute and form Senate Bill 1111, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. I move passage of Senate Bill 1111 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage of Senate Bill 1111 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Mature Minor Doctrine Clarification Act. Its purpose is to require parental consent for all vaccines provided to minors. The impact would be to give parents back the rights to make medical decisions for their children. As amended, it clarifies the definition of vaccines. It also requires that the National Childhood Vaccine Act of 1986 be observed in its entirety. And it also requires that minors parents have responsibility for their minor children. With that explanation, I close with saying that children belong to their families, not the state. I renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. There's a concern I have here related to an exception, and I just want to make sure this is part of the bill here. And it's under COVID-19 vaccinations. And I'll read this for folks. Present law prohibits a healthcare provider from providing a patient who is a minor with a COVID-19 vaccine without first obtaining written consent from the minor's patient's parent or legal guardian. This bill deletes an exception to the provision that applies common law to the minor's capacity to consent to receiving a COVID-19 vaccine if a healthcare provider, in the provider's independent professional judgment, suspects that the minor may be subjected to abuse by a parent or legal guardian, or may be a dependent and neglected child. Why would we want to remove this exception?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's covered in other portions of the law, sir.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Chairman Reagan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. Chairman Reagan.
That's covered in other portions of the law, sir.
Representative Pearson.
Can you clarify what's covered under which portions of the law?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, sir. I don't do your research and homework for you.
Chairman Reagan. Chairman Reagan. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current law is available to the answer the question that the gentleman has posed.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah. Reading this bill, having an exception that doesn't take into account people and children who are neglected, children who are minors who may be being abused by parents or legal guardians who may not be giving them this letter or access to the health needs that they would like to have, such as a vaccination, which may be required for a sport or something like that. You are supporting legislation that is not taking into account the worst circumstances that people can be in for whatever political reasons. The reality is everybody is not in a predicament or a position where they're able to have a parent who can sign off forms, who can take them to the doctors and all of these other things. And you are removing the agency of young people who are already in very difficult positions. And so in the research that you've done, have you seen where there has been any good in removing the agency of young people in difficult positions as it relates to not being able to get access to their public health care needs? Excuse me, I can't see my fellow representative in the blue here. I can't see. Can you move out of the way, please? Thank you. Thank you, sponsor.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure I understood the question there. Would you care to repose it?
Representative Pearson.
Certainly. Where is the proof that removing agency of youth in duress and in difficult circumstances as it relates to their public health needs is a good idea?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proof is actually in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which requires, prior to the administration of a vaccine listed in the vaccine injury table to a minor, the healthcare professional that provides the vaccine must provide an information sheet from the Centers for Disease Control to the parents or legal representatives of the minor. That is law, sir.
Representative Pearson.
And a really important part of what you shared is that it would ultimately, or starts, the genesis is with the healthcare provider. This not only is interrupting a healthcare provider's ability to see that a child might be neglected or a child might be abused and is looking to get their healthcare needs taken care of. You're removing the provider, the healthcare provider's purview in that way, in addition to the agency from this youth or this young person who is saying that they need access to whatever this vaccine is in order to help protect or save their lives, because we're legislating from a point of privilege and not recognizing the people who are not privileged in this way. This is why I think this type of legislation and these types of exemptions are quite dangerous and unhelpful. And I believe that the research does show that removing the agency of young people in decision-making is not only disempowering, but it is not a wise move to make. And so I would encourage us not to pass this legislation and to do further research on the implications.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the concerns that were expressed, we have a Department of Children's Services whose responsibility is to take care of abused and neglected children. They are included in this bill as far as documentation requirements are concerned. And healthcare providers are not empowered to override the judgment of parents or guardians, regardless of the situation, sir.
Representative Johnson of Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kind of like to give a face to the situation that my colleague in the back referred to. Teaching in the classroom 27 years, had multiple students incredibly sick. They came to school because they could get their breakfast and get lunch and have somebody have eyes on them. But they were very sick and not able to get medical care because their parent was not in a mental health capacity and able to help them at the time. And even after reporting to DCS said it was a fine situation. Thank God that the students were 16 and we were able to get them to one of our community schools to see the nurse practitioner because the parent was not able to sign for them or to take care of them. So there are many situations in my years in working in schools where children could not get the care that they need, but for the fact of the mature minor doctrine. And I'm certain that these kids often take a leadership in their home and probably are more responsible about those decisions oftentimes, unfortunately, than their parents. And all the time, even with DCS looking in, they think it's okay. But these kids are staying sick for a long time. And then when they come to school, there's no one to pick them up. They're staying at school. So we have to make sure that these kids are taken care of. And oftentimes they are the most mature voice in their family.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the opinion of the case of Parnham versus JR 442, U.S. Code 584, 1979, the United States Supreme Court wrote, simply because the decision of a parent is not agreeable to the child or because it involves risk does not automatically transfer the power to make that decision from the parents to some agency or officer of the state. The same characterizations can be made for tonsillectomy, appendectomy, or other medical procedures. Most children, even in adolescence, are simply not able to make sound judgments concerning many decisions, including their need for medical care or treatment. Parents can and must take those judgments. The United States Supreme Court decision said that.
Representative Johnson Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1979. I think that a lot of people, I've heard a lot of folks in this body say that, times have changed. And we're in situations where we have some of the highest opiate use in the country. We've got, unfortunately, parents that aren't doing their due diligence, and the kids are suffering for it. And so some parents aren't doing it. And oftentimes, DCS doesn't think it meets the level of interfering. So there are kids, as many times as you want to stand up here and say there aren't, there are many young people who don't have parents to make those decisions for them. And this is cruel.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the speaker took exception to a 1979 case, I'll quote one from 2000. In the case of Troxel versus Granville, the Supreme Court wrote that the 14th Amendment's due process clause has substantive components and provides for heightened protection against government interference with certain fundamental rights and liberties. The fundamental rights to make decisions concerning the care and custody and care of their children belongs to parents. That, by the way, is from this decade.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So you're okay with parents refusing or not getting medical care for their children? Is that what you're saying? Because that sounds like what you're saying.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just quoted two Supreme Court cases to you. I agree with those Supreme Court cases.
Representative Johnson.
You can agree with those Supreme Court cases, but we're talking about in the instant that the parent is not asserting their rights. Do you understand that? There are instances when the parent aren't asserting their rights. That is not what that decision is talking about.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The court cases that I've quoted to you say that those are parental rights. They are not to be usurped by any government agency, to include schools or doctors acting without those parental consents, or in the case of the Department of Children's Services, for which this bill provides a path for them to obtain permission to give shots or vaccines to children. And with that explanation, sir, I renew my motion.
All right. Representative Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? We got objection. We're on the board. We're on previous question. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote. Butler, aye. Moody, aye.
Ayes 73, 25 nays.
Previous question prevails, so we are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1111 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Butler, aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 74, 25 nays.
Senate Bill 1111 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 433 by Chairman White and others relative to the Tennessee Education Savings Account Pilot Program. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 12.
Chairman White moves substitute form. Senate Bill 12, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 12 on third and final consideration.
Chairman White moves passage of Senate Bill 12 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Slater, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Vice Chairman Slavy moves adoption of House Amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of House adoption number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it to be adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House floor, House Bill 433 deals with simply this. In 2019, the Tennessee General Assembly passed the ESA, or the Educational Saving Account Act. This legislation that before you today only applies to the current legislation only applied to Davidson and Shelby counties. It was designed primarily to address those students in districts with priority schools or low-performing schools, and also for students whose household income does not exceed twice the federal income eligibility for the free lunch program, which is around $75,000 a year. It's designed as a school choice program for students where educational options are limited. This legislation today only adds the counties of Hamilton and Knox, and I bring it before you at the request of colleagues from Hamilton and Knox County. There's absolutely no change in the original bill, which caps the first year at 5,000 students. As I mentioned, this only adds 2 counties to the current counties of Davidson and Shelby, and those counties being Hamilton and Knox counties. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman White renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative McKenzie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pretty sure on the title of the bill, you left the word out. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but the title of the bill actually says pilot. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Chairman White.
When we passed it in 2019, when it was to take effect, it was a 5-year pilot. That is correct.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I understand there were lawsuits that were just resolved, but there was never a 5-year pilot program. You have to go through the program. The reason that this General Assembly back then reluctantly agreed to it after a long debate was because it was a pilot program in 2 urban areas. We've done nothing. We've not done one thing other than what we've done this year toward that pilot program, 5-year pilot program, and it's been going on less than a year. Why would you add 2 additional counties to an unproven, unsubstantiated program?
Chairman White.
Thank you. In 2019, when the General Assembly passed it, it wasn't our intention, but it did get tied up in court for 2 years. The Tennessee Supreme Court did make a decision that it was constitutional. So we're now 8 months into the first year. So being a pilot program means that we were collect data over the 5 years, but we're only 8 months into it, and that's fine. But 2 other counties at the request of the colleagues have been want to add. This will actually help us collect more data by having more counties in that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I disagree with the whole notion of adding program. If you have a control group, which is what the intention of this program was, to have a control group, something that you could clearly measure, good, bad, or indifferent, and you've done nothing on that. Part of this program said you were going to have parent surveys. Part of the program said you were going to have the comptroller audit the program. What are the results of the parent surveys and the comptroller's audit, which were conditions of this pilot program?
Chairman White.
Thank you. The original intention of the bill back in 2019 was for it to be statewide. But what was passed out eventually came down to Davidson and Shelby. Now, Davidson and Shelby County, they wanted more counties. They didn't want to be the only 2, but that's what the legislation was passed. Now we would like to add a couple more around the state to make sure that we're collecting enough data. Like I say, we're only 8 months into it. It's not the General Assembly's fault we don't have data yet. It was tied up in court for 2 years.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a clear violation of any kind of program, any kind of situation where you're going to actually try to make something good, to go into it. If you're baking a cake and you put it in the oven 20 minutes later, you go and add more sugar and stir things up, you know what the results are going to be. And that's what you're doing. You have no discernible data on whether this program is good, bad, or indifferent. You know nothing about what the parents think about the program. Zero data. And you're adding potentially thousands of students across 2 of our urban counties. And my last question to you, if this is such a good unknown program, why aren't there any rural counties in this program? We're basically a rural state. Well, why haven't you added any rural counties to this pilot program extended?
Chairman White.
Well, I personally am a big believer in school choice for parents, and the colleagues from Knox and Hamilton County have asked to be added. Now, I think this will give us more data. You say we don't know what the parents, this is all about the parents being able to choose. So putting 2 more counties into this, the cap is still 5,000 the first year, only 5,000 students across the state in these 4 counties. So this will give us more data, and we'll be able to find more out as we move forward in the coming years.
Representative McKenzie. All right. Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this piece of legislation, I keep hearing it was passed in 2019. Let's get one thing clear from the very front. I was on this floor. That bill did not pass. It may have been purchased on this floor, but it did not pass in this House. Next thing is, we're sold the bill of goods that this was to help those kids who were stuck in those poor inner city schools that were so awful. And, we're holding opportunities back from these kids. Well, we know that was a lie because we opened it up this year for anybody and everybody that wants it, and then from the get-go, it was all schools in that LEA, not just the kids who were in the failing schools. So that was a lie from the very beginning. And then we're told this $7,500, we're going to help that poor kid in that failing school get himself or herself a private school education. Well, in Davidson County, the average private school cost over $15,000. So we're going to give that poor kid $7,500 with no transportation to get back and forth to that school. We're going to give him half enough money to go to school. That makes a lot of sense. So again, it's not for those kids. It's for subsidizing wealthy kids, private education. Let's just say what it is, and again, in 2019, it didn't pass on this House floor. It may have something out there on that balcony may have happened and conjured up enough votes on that board, but nothing on this House floor was debated and passed. We may need to ask people down the first floor about the list that floated around for the longest time.
Hey, Representative Mitchell, can we get back to the bill you're kind of going on? You went down a level. Let's stay on the second level if we can. Representative Mitchell.
Now, we're being honest and forthright with the people. The people of Tennessee need to understand that, this pilot project, I think it's a failed project, is what it is. We know how it got here. This House should repeal this legislation and clean up our act because we know how this happened, and be honest with the people. Standing up there, you stood up there and told this House that it was for kids in failing schools. That's not the case. It's not enough money for a kid to go to a private school. That kid that's either in a household of one parent or a household of low income with both parents working multiple jobs to make ends meet. they don't have the transportation to get that kid across town to the private school and not. So let's don't be disingenuous and say what it is. It's for wealthy kids to be subsidized. That's all this is about. And let's also be honest with, it's the charter schools that have been taking away from the mid-level private schools. We had to throw them some cash. That's what this is about as well. Your charter school schemes have been killing these mid-level, a lot of Christian schools you've been putting under because of all your charter school legislation. But like I said, again, it wasn't passed on this house. It was purchased on that balcony.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman White, would you yield, sir?
Chairman White.
Sir, yes, sir.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. Chairman White, I heard you earlier say that our colleagues in those two locations, those counties, I think concurred with what you're saying. Now, I'm one of the colleagues where most of those schools are located in Hamilton County. Have we had a discussion on whether the community, the people, want this process, voucher process, to move forward in Hamilton County?
Chairman White.
Yes, this was brought to me by colleagues from Hamilton County. And as the bill was moving forward, the Knox County colleagues came and said, can we add that? And so this comes from a member and members from those counties. So I'm standing here as a person who believes in parental school choice for options for parents and children where there is no other option. And I disagree with the former representative's statements. This is for those who have no options. Many of us do. That's why I'm for charters, public, private, homeschooling, anything that helps the parent. The parent makes the choice. There's nothing in this bill that prevents the parent from making the best choice for their child. That's what this is entirely about. So yes, I'm carrying this on behalf of those colleagues who asked me to from those two counties.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stated to you, sir, that the majority of those schools are in my district. Have you had a discussion with me, not my colleagues who have schools in other areas, about whether the parents, whether I ask you to move forward on this?
Chairman White.
Yes, sir, Representative. I wish I had time to get around to everybody and ask them, but as you know, we've been very busy. This bill has been out there for a while. It went through the education committees. And also, if you had an issue with it, I would ask you to come to me. I can't get around to everybody like nobody else can.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So evidently you feel it's all right to make legislation in an area for a representative without talking with that representative. So I leave that at that, but I disagree with that process. Now, why is it good for young people in the inner city, in the urban areas, but not good for young people in the rural communities who have concerns or problems just like we do in the inner cities?
Chairman White.
Well, that's fine. That's just where the status of the bill is right now, because these are where the priority schools are. In this legislation, you have to have 3 or more priority schools in 2015 and 2017 data. And so that's where the legislation is currently. You have to have a priority or school in the priority area.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what you're telling us is that it's not relevant to what the parents think in those communities. It's not relevant what the community leaders think and the representative in that community. And my question to you is that if we have public schools, we have charter schools, and now you want to open it up to voucher schools, what happens to those young people who stays in those public schools where monies are being siphoned off to go to private entities. I mean, where I think a good school environment has a mixture of young people, not all of them having, in an environment that is not conducive to learning. How does that help those students who are in those schools that, where monies are being siphoned off?
Chairman White.
Thank you. Actually, I always hate the conversation go down to around money. We put a lot of money in public education, but I want us to talk about the student. If the student is needing an alternative form of education, as I mentioned, whether it be public or charter or private or home, nobody's hitting it at 100%. So to give the parent, that one parent that may want it, the choice is what this is all about.
That's 5 minutes. Representative Johnson of Knox, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can say that once again, colleagues in Knoxville that were not spoken to about this legislation are the two districts where these schools lie as well. And so I know there are a lot of people in this room, but one in Chattanooga that you didn't speak to and two in Knox County. I don't imagine 3 people is too difficult to reach out to. But I think that it's important to note that some of my colleagues from Knox County might have brought this to you. However, the citizens of Knox County, the majority of them, do not want vouchers. And that is a fact by polling. Now, and by all the people that come to us about it. And I think it's important to note, we've been operating vouchers for 8 months. And there are multiple states that have vouchers, ESA, whatever. Been doing it a while, actually. So there's plenty of data in there. And what we know that not one single state with vouchers has students with a voucher performing better than their public school peers. Not one. As a matter of fact, in multiple states, students are performing worse in math. And so this is something that we know. Why don't we find out how it performs in Tennessee before we expand this to counties that do not want it? And it's draining schools. My colleague is right. It is draining funds from our traditional public schools. And what we see in states like Wisconsin and other states who have had vouchers for a while, 60% of the kids receiving vouchers have never been in public schools. They are just having their private school education subsidized because they did the same thing. They kept expanding, and including any income bracket. Now 60% are just subsidizing people who never even went to public school. And their rural schools are suffering dramatically in funding. And so the idea that this is some sort of a solution, it's not been proven anywhere in the country, and it's not been proven in Tennessee yet. So why are we rushing to change something that is not working? The only thing that a couple of states can say is some parents like it better, but the performance is not better in any state when you compare a voucher using student to their public school peer. And I think that is a critically important point here before we go expanding, that we look at that and have some data on how it's doing here. You can tell me that Tennessee's going to do something different. I haven't seen it yet, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of people that want to be involved in this process so far. Maybe we're expanding just because it's turning out that people don't want to be involved with vouchers. But forcing it on people, forcing it on counties who don't want it, are you not concerned at all about the data and the research across the country that says they don't work?
Chairman White.
Thank you. No, I look at a lot of data on this as education chair. Members, let me ask you a question in response to the representatives. Why is it only in K through 12 education that we have an issue with tax dollars going to privates? Once you graduate from 12th grade, you take federal Pell Grant dollars and you go to any college you want to, public and or private, and it works quite well. I believe that if we as a state and nation open it up to where parents have choices to where their children go to school, which best fits them, then we as an education system are better off. So it's only in K through 12 we have a problem with this, not in higher education or in other areas.
Representative Johnson.
It's because K through 12 education is required for every single child in that age group. That's why college and post-secondary is not required. Now, there are choices. In the counties you have chosen, there are choices. There are magnet school, career prep. There's all sorts of choices in those areas. So the reality is you're choosing to go in.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you for making my point. It is required. That's the whole point. And if you're locked into a failing system in a low-performing priority schools, a parent that's making $75,000 or less that will lack educational opportunity for the children, they don't have it. It is required. And so there is no option for them. So this is a bill to help parents find a way out if it's not working for them. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew the motion.
Representative Carringer.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to thank Chairman White for bringing this bill and for agreeing to add the Knox County delegation. The people in my district, which is District 16 in Knox County, very much support this. I've received emails, text, and phone calls asking to please work and try to get Knox County added on to this bill. And I also ran as school choice because I believe that parents should have the choice in how they educate their children. So I just want to thank you very much, and to let my other Knox County colleagues know each district supports and needs different things for their district, and District 16 in Knox County very much supports this. So thank you, Chairman White.
Chairman White.
Thank you very much for that comment.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple questions to the bill sponsor. All of in the ESA bill that we've debated years ago, and this body has moved on, which has nothing to do with this bill right now. It's about 2 counties wanting to expand. Are all of those guardrails and qualifications and stops in there of how many kids can take advantage of this program, are those still all in place?
Chairman White.
That's absolutely correct. We're not changing anything in the original bill. All those guardrails are there. This bill is totally about adding 2 counties, Knox and Hamilton.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And all of the income requirements that were in the original ESA bill, those are all still intact. Is that correct?
Chairman White.
That is correct. You can't earn 2 times more than the federal limit on if you qualify for free lunch, which family of 4 is about $75,000.
Representative Sapicki.
And if a student, because we've heard the statement many times here that this is only for private schools, could a student use these ESA funds to go to another public school, maybe outside the district that has a great school, another public school outside the district?
Chairman White.
It is my understanding, and it's been, 4 years now since we passed the original, this is for parents to get an education savings account where they can put and go to another school, which is primarily private.
Representative Sapicki.
Now, members, we passed this educational savings account bill 3 years ago. The courts and COVID has held this program up to where we've just got it implemented right now. We have 2 counties that are volunteering to help expand this so we can collect valuable data. And the reason why it's important to get the valuable data right now as quick as possible is because we have a funding mechanism for the first 3 years of the programs that makes the schools harmless for a student that leaves and goes somewhere else. So not only are we going to pay as a state for that student to go somewhere else, we're also going to pay that existing school system who lost a student the money for that student as if they were still there, which means those public schools are going to get smaller classroom sizes and more money. That is something that our opponents have been arguing is they want smaller classrooms and more money. And if we give them smaller classrooms and more money, they're promising us they'll get better results. So in my opinion, we're killing two birds here with one stone. We're giving the public schools the ability to have smaller classrooms and more money, and we're giving parents the opportunity to find a better education for their kids. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll be supporting this bill, and I thanks to the bill sponsor.
Chairman White.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those comments. All that's absolutely right. And just let me, unless there's any other questions, just say to you that giving parents the opportunity to help their child, what's best for their education is what it's all about. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Parkinson. Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman White, for your passion for Tennessee's children and for parents and their ability to choose what education is best for their children. It truly is admirable. I have two questions for you, both of which are about data, as Representative Cepicky has just pointed out. First, I understand from your presentation that there are a total of 5,000 seats in this 5-year pilot program. Are you able to tell us how many of those seats currently are occupied by students in Shelby and Davidson counties, the two counties that are currently in the program? And then secondly, in your view, would it be best to have data at the conclusion of the pilot program, not just from West Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, but also from East Tennessee, Hamilton County and Knox County, when we actually take a look at the success of the program after the 5 years?
Chairman White.
Thank you very much. Yes, in the original bill, the first year, the cap was 5,000 students. Because it was tied up in court for 2 years, it came out 8 months ago, so it was a slow rollout. Only 500 have been able to take advantage of it so far. Now 2,000 are in the process of applying. But so by having more counties in there that we could reach, the more data that comes in, the better you can make your decision. And so that is correct. First year cap is still 5,000.
Representative Travis.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I call previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? There's objection. We're voting on previous question. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 70, 27 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 12 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 57, 35 nays, 4 present on voting.
Senate Bill 12, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion reads to table. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 947 by Chairman Boyd relative to management of utility systems. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 845.
Chairman Boyd moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 845, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 845 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Boyd moves passage of Senate Bill 845 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment rewrites the bill, so we're going to defer to the sponsor for a brief yet very informative informative and enlightening explanation. Thank you.
Chairman Vaughn moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate Bill 845 takes 2 utility regulatory boards under the Comptroller's Office. That's the Utility Management Review Board and the Water and Wastewater Finance Board. It merges them together into a new board that will be under the Comptroller's Office that will be called the Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation. Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Boyd renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor, can you talk about the redundancy that this is supposed to be or efficiency it's supposed to be fixing here?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I would agree with that. Merging these 2 boards together that essentially have the same purpose into one board will consolidate and sort of streamline the process, and it'll clear it up for all of those public utilities like water authorities, public utility districts, or municipally owned utilities. It kind of makes it more uniform.
Representative Pearson.
And did this come from the Comptroller's Office, or where did this originate? Did any of the groups like Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, any of our utilities have any input in this?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So actually, it's what happened last year. If you were on the Commerce Committee or Business Utilities, we just sat down and just learned everything we could about utilities in Tennessee. We heard from the investor-owned and the public, which falls under the Comptroller's Office. One of the things we noticed is that you had these 2 boards essentially doing the same thing under the Comptroller's Office with a few just little variations. And so after consultation with the Comptroller's Office and the utility folks, we asked them to merge those 2 together. They thought it was a great idea too. But yes, everyone that's been affected by this has spoken and had an opinion, and we've made various changes along the way. So yes, they were aware of this, and they did talk to the comptrollers as the bill was put together.
Representative Pearson.
Okay. Who has most of the interaction with these boards as they currently stand?
Chairman Boyd.
Can you rephrase that? I want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Representative Pearson.
Who usually goes before the wastewater board, or who would be going before the Tennessee Utility Board? Who works most directly with them?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Water and Wastewater Finance Board is mainly your municipal, your county-owned, or your water authorities. And then the UMRB, the Utility Management Review Board, is largely public utility districts.
Representative Pearson.
So that's why I'm curious. So for groups like Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, other utilities, you said they were consulted in support of this?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, so they would have reported as a municipal, they would have been under the Water Wastewater Finance Board. And so they have been consulted in this, and almost every stakeholder group or everyone that's affected has had little asks that they want to make sure that's included in the legislation. And I'm certain they were involved. I did speak to Memphis Light and Gas when they were in town for the day, and they were aware that the bill was going on and, had questions. And I'm pretty sure they sorted that out with the Comptroller's Office.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to didn't see you, Representative Dixie.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess my question is that we've seen over the course of this session where different boards have been realigned, especially in Davidson County at a historical commission, where there's been, the appointees has been 3 for the speaker, 3 for the lieutenant governor, 3 for the governor. Why aren't the appointees, since we're realigning things, and that's been the explanation we've received, why doesn't this follow along those same lines?
Chairman Boyd.
All right, I want to make sure I unpack this properly. Can you restate that question real specifically what you're asking?
Representative Dixie.
So in Davidson County, on our boards, specifically the Metro Nashville Airport Authority and the Historical Commission, we'll take 2, one local and one statewide. The appointees have been taken away from realigned. Let's say they've been realigned. Instead of the way that it has been, they've been realigned to where the appointees have been 3 for the governor, 3 for the speaker, 3 for the lieutenant governor, and then some ad hoc ones. Why does this particular bill not align the appointees the same way it does that we've seen going in the past?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, I understand your question now. So there were 9 board members on the WWFB and the 9 members on the UMRB. And so they tried to keep it as much as they could. It's now going to be a 11-member board. So they kind of took the current appointments and just merged them together. The governor gets a few of them. There are some legislative appointments, and then there are some that come from various departments. But this is a statewide board. So that as far as is an appointment coming from a particular local government, that wouldn't really be relevant in this, because this new board would regulate all public utilities from Mountain City to Memphis.
Representative Dixie.
Thank you. I appreciate. That's why I used the example of the historical commission. It's a statewide commission, and it was realigned, and it was pretty much all the governor's appointees. I think this one, it previously had 9. This one still has 7, I believe, and then it goes on. So that was my point, is saying that it seems to be inequitable how we're picking and choosing and cherry picking which commissions get the special treatment from the Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, and the governor. But then on this one, it specifically doesn't really change anything about the appointees, but those other ones drastically change who is appointed. And that's my question. It doesn't necessarily need an answer. I just wanted to make my point clear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have anything, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Representative Pearson.
Yes, I have one question. Thank you, Speaker, about the representation, because it seems like there was at least one person who was on the board who would be kind of a citizen, an environmentalist, something like this, but in the new construction that isn't there. Can you say why?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so sorry. Can you say that again? I want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Representative Pearson.
In the current construction of the board, there seems to be an environmental representative of some sort who might have experience previously, but is not necessarily a utility person or something like that. They're almost a lay person for the board. But in the new construction, there isn't such a person as an environmental representative. And you know, this is a passion of mine, environmental justice. So why we wouldn't want to have that voice on the board?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Which position on the former board are you referring to? Is that on the WWFD or the UMRB, the environmental one that you're referencing?
Representative Pearson.
Yeah, I wish I could find the commission exactly. I was reading through this previously, but there's a member of the board who's assigned, or a commissioner who it said it doesn't necessarily have to have been a part of a public utility, may not have experience in that, but they're represented. They still have representation, even though they're not necessarily associated with the utility. And so, how are we ensuring rather that another voice, like an environmentalist, is actually included in the new construction of the board?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so we do have the co-chair of the board would be an appointee from TDEC, the commissioner of TDEC or a designee from there. So that was taken into consideration. We've not altered this a whole lot. We tried to take what the current boards were made up of and merge those into this one. And there were a few changes. I mean, but for the most part, it's pretty equitable. And just to remind you that the comptroller is not this comptroller's office is not TDEC. Their purpose is not environmental. Theirs is financial. And so that's everything that every person on this board is here to ensure that these utilities have the rate set properly to protect the community and make sure that they're justifiable and reasonable rates, and also to make sure that the rates are not too low so that the utility gets into financial distress. So that's the main purpose of this board.
Representative Pearson.
Got it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objections to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 845 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 91, 3 nays.
Senate Bill 845 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsidered table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk. Representative Freeman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
purpose?
No, I'm out of order, but I'm looking at my colleague here, and he seems extremely nervous, and I'm afraid he may not be ready to present his bill. I make a motion to roll House Bill 1231 and 1232 to the heel of House Regular Calendar 1.
Proper motion, proper consent, without objection. So ordered. Representative Boyd, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that I'm out of order, but members, some friends from the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors are here today for their day on the Hill, and they have just showed up in the gallery up there. Folks, if you could make them feel welcome.
Out of order. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings us to item 37. Item 37, Senate Joint Resolution 174 by Representative Hicks of Washington, a resolution to recognize and commend the Danube Institute.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 174.
Representative Hicks moves to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 174. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, all amendments filed.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Danube Institute, established in 2013, is headquartered in Budapest, Hungary, and is one of the premier conservative think tanks of Europe. It bills itself as a center-right and is committed to a respectful conversation in cultural, religious, and social life. One particular area in which the Institute focuses is the Christian faith. This can be seen by the research group that puts a focus on the importance of Christian faith and democracy. This group believes the study of Christian principles, values, practices, and institutions can contribute to the rediscovery of the Christian roots and provide a solid basis for the preservation of Christian political traditions. It also created a persecuted Christians research group, which helps Hungary become one of the first countries in the world to address the issue of persecuted Christians at a government level. Istvan Kiss is the executive director and has met with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development and the Department of Agriculture. Mr. Kiss was here and had the opportunity to speak on the Senate floor a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully, we can work together on issues that affects our citizens. It has been interesting to read about the Hungarian way of life. The way they believe that there's very little problems with issues like addiction, mental health, homelessness, crime, and welfare. In welfare, if you are able, then you work. I believe this stems from their belief in living by Christian faith. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Hicks renews his motion. Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm deeply troubled by this resolution, Representative Hicks. This organization is tied to an autocrat in Hungary, Orban. Are you familiar with who that is?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I'm not.
Representative Jones.
So you're bringing a resolution for an organization tied to an authoritarian who you're not even familiar what this organization is. And so that just shows us that there's not been thought put into this. This is about fascism. This is an organization that has been allied with fascist governments. And I don't know if that's what this government wants to be. We see what we're doing here, expelling members for dissenting, but that's what was happening in Hungary. And so this is very disturbing, it's very troubling. It's perpetuating this false moral narrative of persecution. And it's also pushing this very anti-democratic, authoritarian, autocratic way of thinking. And I think that's counter to what we should stand for in this body. But I see that we're sliding in and we're trying to model ourselves off those very troubling forms of government. And so my question is, who asked you to bring this resolution?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a constituent in my district that has done the research and actually went to Hungary and presented the executive director and the director of this with the proclamation. And he was on the Senate floor not long ago. And that's why I'm in studying this. It was actually very interesting to find, we live in a great state, okay? But a lot of the issues that we deal with in this state, especially of late, is not solved politically. It is really not. And that's what I took to this is their faith. They solve issues through spiritual growth in generations. And I think that's something that we can really grab a hold of in this state and in America and look at.
Representative Jones.
If you believe that to be true, Representative Hicks, perhaps it's time to switch professions, because we're here as a government body to promote the public good. If you want to go to theology school, I see some folks from Vanderbilt Divinity here who you can ask about how to apply.
Representative Jones, you're out of order. That's enough. We're moving on. No, sir. I'm not. You've been out of order. You're out of order. We're not doing this. Representative McCalman's next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question's been called. Is there objection? We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 71, 20 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 174, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 70, 20 nays, two present, unvoted.
Senate Joint Resolution 174 having a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call it next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to item 10. Item 10 on Monday's calendar. House Bill 727 by Representative Fritz, relative to consent and educational events. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Representative Jones, for what purpose?
Speaker, I rise for a point of order. Mr. Speaker, for the majority of this morning, I've sat here silently observing how out of order this House has been. We've had members make personal comments and attacks against other members.
What's your point of order? What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, please do not cut my microphone off. Let me finish my point of order.
Representative Jones, I'm asking you right now, what's your point of order? Making accusations and other stuff would not be good. So I would ask you, if you have a point of order, you need to stick to the point of order. This is not where you can do personal orders, personal statements, political statements. This is if you have a question for a point of order. Well, then stick to the point of order. Last opportunity. Representative Jones.
I'm laying out the reasons for my point of order. We've had multiple out of order comments be made from this floor on this day. No one else was shut off from speaking. We've had members here acting out of order, obstructing speakers. I couldn't even hear the majority of comments made because you see as Jody's standing here talking, this is what has happened all day.
You mean Representative Barrett?
I mean Jody Barrett, the man in front of me.
Representative Jody Barrett? You mean Representative Jody Barrett? Representative Jones.
Mr. Speaker, this House has been out of order. I had a parent stop me as I was going to the restroom saying she's never seen such a misbehaved body of adults. And yet,
Representative Jones. Out of order. Out of order. Representative Jones, you need to ask the point of order to the clerk or we're going to move on. Representative Jones.
My point of order is, how do we get consistent application of House decorum rules, where it seems that the Speaker is choosing what rules apply to which representatives? Look at how out of order this is. Look at how out of order your House is.
So that's the question. Mr. Clerk, after we take our recess, can you please provide the rules on Representative Jones' desk that provide the House? Can you provide that? Very good. Thank you. All right, let's go. Moving on. Next order, Mr. Clerk. Oh, Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1443.
Representative Fritz moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1443, probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of SB 1443 on third and final consideration.
Representative Fritz moves passage of Senate Bill 1443 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 1443, good morning, members. This legislation does four things, basically. It gives parents access to all surveys, analyses, and evaluations, and requires that they give written, informed consent in order for a minor student to participate. This does not apply, I say again, does not apply to surveys, analysis, and/or evaluations if they are being given to determine the effectiveness of instruction or curriculum. Secondly, the bill requires an LEA to obtain written, informed consent before the minor student can participate in health services, with the exception of the following screenings: vision, hearing, blood pressure, and dental. Number 3, the bill requires that the parent or legal guardian to provide written, informed consent prior to the minor student participating in gender identity or sexual orientation curriculum. Students who do not have permission to participate in these classes shall not be penalized for the grading purposes. And fourthly, parents must provide written consent prior to a minor student participating in a club or organization. Why is this needed? There's a growing trend within many schools to presume that parents or guardians are not going to be involved in their children's lives. The House has passed several pieces of legislation this year. We have passed those, increasing expectations in our educational realm. We passed HB 437, third grade literacy. We passed 322, physical security in our schools. House Bill 329 are raising expectations for teacher salaries. And House Bill 843, the appropriateness of materials. We must also hold to higher expectations for our parental rights and the interface with the LEA. In trying to accommodate the lack of involvement by some parents, we have taken away the fundamental rights of many parents. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Fritz renews this motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was once a member of Education Administration Committee, and I heard this bill, and I'm even more troubled by the explanation given by Representative Fritz today than I was in committee. This bill is about preemptively trying to censor education. It's putting more work on our teachers to submit their lesson plans, their surveys, any activities to parents for approval. And it's under the guise that we want parent involvement. We want to hear what parents think. But the truth is, if this body really cared about what parents think, we would listen to the thousands of parents calling on us to pass common sense gun laws.
Representative Jones, once again, that is out of order. You're moving on a different topic. You're supposed to stay on the topic of the bill. So this is your last chance. From this point forward, any rule out order, we will move to the next speaker. Representative Jones.
Mr. Speaker, this is about how parents can opt their children out of any type of activity or things that occur at school. I'm trying to figure out how can we opt our children out of being victims of mass shootings. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Jones, out of order. Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, sir.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask you if, thank God we don't, and if I do, I don't know, and you probably don't either, but if you had a child who were having some problems with their self-identity in terms of sexual orientation, would you not want them to come to you first before they would go to anyone else? And I know what you're saying, they have to come to you first, but would you not want them to feel comfortable to come to you as a parent and talk to you before they talk to anyone else?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. This bill is not about confused children. This bill is about parental rights.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's what I see in the legislation. You're saying that they couldn't go to anyone without parental consent, certain things, and one of those things would be sexual orientation. So I think what I'm saying is if I had a son or daughter, God forbid, I don't think I have, but if I had one, I'd want them to feel comfortable to come to me where I could instruct them and help them to go to the right persons to get the counseling that they needed. And I think that your legislation could prevent that from happening if we're not careful. How do you respond to that, sir?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again for the question. But this legislation deals with what the child can be instructed in school and requires the parent to opt in for those topics. That's simply all it does. It requires that opt-in.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes the child, as you know, will have more confidence in the teacher than they will the parents in some cases because, you know, as parents, we are going to always teach our kids the right thing and put the hammer down and say, don't do this and don't do that, when sometimes they will go to their teachers and express themselves about things that they don't feel comfortable to come to us. So to me, I think the legislation is hindering us from having those kind of relationships with our children, where I think I know what you mean and what you're trying to do, but I really believe that that is going to maybe cause some division between the parent and the student in some cases. I just wanted to get that on record. I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't think this is a good idea. I want my child to be able to express his or herself to whomever they feel comfortable to do that first and foremost, and then moving to whatever counseling we need to help them. Thank you for listening.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative, for that great question. And I do hold again that this only affects the instructional mechanism in our schools and requires that parental opt-in. It does not negate anything that you just offered.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Fritz, I've enjoyed getting to know you this year. I really disagree with this piece of legislation, and there are a couple of questions I have, and then I'd like to make a comment. So you're requiring a parent to opt in to sexual orientation instruction. I'm not sure I understand what sexual orientation instruction is, and if you could answer that.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill is pretty clear. You can read through the bill. It gives very specific examples of what is required for that learning. It's those two topic areas. However, it does require the same opt-in by parents for other clubs and organizations within the school. This bill is written upon the foundation that God gave the children to the parents, not the state of Tennessee. And he did not give them to the United States. He gave them to the children, or to the parents. And it is the parents' incumbent responsibility to play an active role in that education. This opt-in policy simply does that. It does not prevent the parent from allowing their child to be instructed in any area. It simply requires an opt-in. Now, there are exceptions for the health screening that I read over that we had reached agreement that seemed to be common sense to leave them as opt-out, but the rest of it's opt-in.
Representative Freeman.
Yeah, and I guess that the thing that bothers me is that once again, we are giving the appearance that talking about gender identity or LGBTQ sexuality is somehow wrong, and I have an issue with that. And and the big issue is, you know, we go to school to we go to school to learn and to challenge what our norms are. I wasn't a big history fan. I didn't necessarily like science. I would have loved to have been able to opt out, but I am who I am because my teachers pushed me and challenged me. When you go to college, you get your worldview challenged. Where I grew up, I had my bubble of friends and influence. When I went to college and when I went to high school, those norms were pushed. I got to meet people from other cultures, people that had a different background, people that had a different sexuality. And us limiting that is limiting the students' growth. And I'm afraid that this legislation will just further that. And again, I would love your direct answer, if you can give it, on why you believe discussing a member of the LGBTQ community's sexuality is so dangerous that we need to allow parents to opt them out of it, but yet not opt out of math or science.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, I've also enjoyed getting to know you this year, so thank you so much, and I appreciate your comments. But I think you've just made the point of what I'm trying to do here, because you use the word allow the parents, and that comes from a statist belief that we, the state of Tennessee, somehow have authority over those parental rights. Our nation was not founded on that. The godly principles of which we have built this nation and our founding fathers do not support that view of allowing parents to do things. And our Supreme Court decisions have not been consistent with that view. I will offer you this. In 1997, the Supreme Court declared the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the fundamental right of parents, I say again, parents, to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children. So I would offer you, Representative, this is simply in compliance with what has been our law, our Supreme Court decisions, and the basis of which this nation was founded. Secondarily, I would offer in 2000, the court declared that, and I quote, "The liberty interests of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests recognized by the court." So again, I appreciate your comments, and it is good getting to know you.
Representative Johnson and Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think we've clarified, just to make sure, this bill requires opting in rather than allowing opting out. Is that correct?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. Yes, ma'am, opt in on most things. There are a few opt out, as those that I just read, Representative, regarding the health screenings.
Representative Johnson.
Okay, so by requiring parents who have no problem with the instruction and the curriculum that this body has approved, you are stepping on those parents' right by requiring them to opt in. I don't understand why those few parents who disagree with our curriculum and our instruction, I'm not sure what you think is being taught, but I'm pretty sure that maybe if some folks went and spent some time in classrooms, they would see what is actually being taught. And so I think you're stepping on the rights of parents who are okay with the instruction in our public schools and with the curriculum that this body approved, and requiring an opt-in from folks who have no issue with it. That seems to me to be stepping on their rights.
Representative Johnson, was that a question?
Do you see it as stepping on those parents' right? Why do we not have an opt-out, which we've always had, rather than requiring every single parent to opt in?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ma'am, for the question. And I would question your use of the word always. It has been a relatively recent thing that we decided that we were going to instruct in any topic that the parent did not give permission to. Many of us are of the same age group that the parents had to approve of whatever we learned in our schools outside the base curriculum, anything that we participated in clubs and groups. So I would question your use of the word always or your definition of always. And I do not think at all we're stepping on the rights of parents. Again, this bill simply requires that for most things, there is an opt-in by the parent. I think that is consistent with what we have done in raising expectations in this good body for how we educate and make Tennessee the very best schools in this entire nation. That is my objective, I assure you, that everyone around these United States would look to the schools in this great state of Tennessee as the very best. I think that's very much achievable. And I think that setting these high expectations that we have set over this session and sessions prior to are the right ways to do that.
Representative Johnson.
Do you have any data to suggest that this bill is going to improve? Is there any research on that? Because, you know, I am with you 100% on making Tennessee the best schools in the country. And the way you do that is by funding great programs and fully funding public education and not privatizing education. And the idea that this is going to be a nightmare for educators as far as the opt-in. It would be so much easier to track parents who opt out than requiring every parent to opt in. If you've been in a classroom and you've seen a lot of students that struggle to get things back to class and parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs that struggle to get things back. So the reality is the opt-out is it's a much better solution.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your input. I appreciate that. I would draw on one word that you used there, Representative. You referred to it being easier. Life and my experience has taught me that the path of ease is not the path to excellence. And so sometimes it requires us to take that steeper path. Sometimes it requires us to stand up and do the right things. Sometimes it requires us to take on those challenges for norms that we have allowed to filter themselves into our society that weaken our society. Sometimes it requires us to stand up and do the right thing. And sometimes that requirement is making sure that our parents are engaged in this process of learning and that they opt in. Again, I don't think the easier path is the right path. I think most of my good teachers in my district do not choose the easy path. I think they embrace challenge because they're committed to Roane and Loudoun counties, putting out the very best kids in the great state of Tennessee. So thank you for your input. I appreciate what you have to say.
Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call previous question.
Previous question been called. Objection. There's objection. We're voting. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye. When the bell rings, those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 74, 25 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1443 as amended, vote aye. When the bell rings, those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 74, 24 nays.
Senate Bill 1443 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. Most reconsidered table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to item 28. Item 28 of Monday's calendar. Senate Bill 927 by Chairman Hulsey relative to inmates infected with bloodborne pathogens.
Chairman Hulsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927.
Chairman Hulsey moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion on Senate Bill 927.
Chairman Hulsey moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927, probably second without objection. So ordered, Chairman Hulsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To clear some of this up and some of the confusion, legal did say that the way the bill's written, it's somewhat convoluted, but they assured me that when meds are funded by the federal or state funds, then the county has no duty to pay for it. In other words, that money's coming in, so now they can relax. It does not remove their responsibility of providing this medication if there is no money. And of course, that's the intent of the bill anyway.
Representative Pearson, I think that was your question. Does that answer your question from prior? All right, thank you. All right. Chairman Halsey renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you for talking to legal and chatting about that with me, because that was definitely a concern that I had. What I also want to know is, looking at the fiscal note for this bill, it talks about the Ryan White Fund. Could you talk a little bit about what that fund is and how the dollars are currently allocated?
Chairman Halsey.
I'm not positive about the complete allocation, but Ryan Fund White money comes from the federal government. There has been some changes in that by the executive branch of our government. I don't know all the details about that. I do know that there is a plan to substitute state money in for some of that, and that's why the wording was changed. And some of it is allocated for prevention, some of it's allocated for treatment, some of it's allocated for education. But that's the whole purpose, was to open up an avenue that counties can maybe find some relief for this medication.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah, and this is the challenge, and well, I believe one question was answered. That the challenge that I have is the Ryan White Fund and all that it does, which I believe is really important work. It's still only about $26 million, so it's not extraordinarily substantial for the work that our state needs to do, particularly when we turn away $9 million from the federal government to deal with HIV prevention and education. And the reason this is an important issue for me, I'm in Shelby County, which has the third highest rate of transmission for HIV in the country. And so the monies going into this work are really important. And the concern that I have is that we will have our jails, which incarcerate people, have a responsibility for those folks, using dollars, for instance, from the Ryan White Fund, which funds a myriad of organizations or people who are not incarcerated, drawing down on the money from the general population through the Ryan White Fund, instead of us paying, or those counties paying, the cost of care for the people they're incarcerating. Is there, how are we preventing that from happening and not using a fund that's supposed to deal with the HIV epidemic in the state of Tennessee to going directly to our to prisons?
Chairman Halsey.
I can't solve that. I can't say that somebody with HIV outside the jail is more important than somebody with HIV in the jail. So I can't solve that for you.
Representative Pearson.
I don't want you to think that there's, for some reason, a value, a life judgment that we're making. We're talking about where the resources come from. And right now, the counties are paying for the resources for people who are incarcerated, and the Ryan White Fund is open more to the general public. I believe that a potential fix, right, is more resources going to counties to help fund the folks who are incarcerated, our citizens who are incarcerated, and getting their support. But the worry here is that the money that today is going, is in a fund to go to a larger group of people, is now going to just be going directly to prisons, because our counties or the state don't want to pay for those costs. And so there has to be a way, and I would hope we can find a way to meet the needs within the prison and with our incarcerated citizens' health, as well as the folks outside of it. Not taking $9 million obviously is an executive branch problem, but for us in this legislative body, helping to replenish those funds and increase those funds, however it needs to be done, is a remedy I think we need to consider, because this is a serious problem. But I don't think taking away money from Peter to pay Paul is the way to do it, if you will.
Chairman Halsey.
Thank you. And I understand what you're saying. I just can't solve it. I'm just trying to find an avenue that jails can find some financial relief, and I don't know that they would get all that they need out of this anyway, but I'm just trying to find a way to help them. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Chairman Halsey, I believe your intent here is well-meaning. My concern is that under current law, those county legislative bodies have the responsibility to provide all that medical care in those jails. And here we're saying they don't have to do it for medication for HIV positive patients. And I understand the desire to shift that burden over to the federal government or the state government. So my question then is, since you have amended this legislation and shifted it to the state or federal government, do we have that funding in this year's budget? Is that funding specifically provided for this purpose or contemplated by the budget that we're going to vote on later today or this week?
Chairman Holsey.
I understand it. Yes, it is.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my concern there is, I know that the governor has said he's going to put X amount of dollars to replace that federal funding, but I believe the Ryan White funding was well in excess of that 8.3, give or take, $1 million. And that Ryan White funding is what was used to fund this medication in the jails. So are you 100% sure that that funding is available in this year's budget to fill in this hole to the jails? Because if it's not, now we're excluding it from the local government's responsibility, putting it in the state's responsibility. We're denying those federal funds, but the state might not have that money to even do it. So now the unintended consequence of your legislation may be that HIV medication is not going to be available at all. That's my sole concern. And so I would like assurance that that money is going to be in this budget.
Chairman Holsey.
As I understand it, if we vote for this budget and pass it, that money is in there. There's a portion of that in there. I do not know the exact amount. At the end of the day, in my county, right now I have 2 inmates that are HIV. It costs the county, Sullivan County Sheriff's Department, $7,000 a month for that. Let's say they apply and can only get a $2,000 relief on that. They're still responsible for the other $5,000 to make sure that the medication is served. They still have that statute responsibility to do that. So however you shift the money around, if there's no money for them to get, there's no money for them to get. This is the only door I know that would open for them to get some.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I believe you have information that says how much money in Ryan White funding our state got last year.
Chairman Holsey.
That is correct. I believe it was 22.4 million, I think, maybe 26.4 million.
He's trying to get you the answer. Hang on. Chairman Holsey.
Yes, in this proposed budget, we're putting 26.5 million reoccurring to replace.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's the number I was looking for. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. To the sponsor, there's a constitutional obligation for the jails or prisons to provide medical care, correct?
Chairman Holsey.
That is correct.
Representative Hardaway.
So it really doesn't matter. It does matter, but in the great scheme of things, no matter where they have to get the money, the inmates will receive adequate medical care.
Chairman Holsey.
And thank you, sir. I appreciate your analytical thought all the time. You are exactly correct.
All right, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question be called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 927 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Holsey's aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 94, 5 nays.
Senate Bill 927 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most for serious table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes Monday's regular calendar, but if I may, Mr. Speaker, remind the members, 2 of those bills were rolled to the heel of the regular calendar 1 that was set for today. So if you printed any material, please save that material for those bills when they come up at the end of regular calendar 1 for today.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We could take up the House message calendar.
Without objection, Mr. Clerk, call it first message.
Item 1, House Bill 92 by Representative Gillespie relative to traffic safety. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 92 for Senate Bill 201, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 92 as amended.
Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, what this amendment does is we're renaming or naming the bill. This was the move over bill that I carried up on the floor a couple weeks ago to the Jabari DeBailey bill. For those of you all that know Mr. DeBailey, he was hit several years ago by a motorist while stranded on the side of the road and lost one of his legs and was unable to attend a football scholarship. And so we're basically calling this move over bill and naming it after him. With that, I move to concur with Senate Amendment number 1.
Representative Gillespie moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 95, no nays, 1 present, unvoted.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. Most read series table. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 160 by Speaker Pro Tem Marsh relative to alcoholic beverages. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 160 for Senate Bill 161, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 160 as amended.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment 1, which adds some penalties to the, if the servers do certain penalties, they still have to wait out 8 years to get their liquor license back. With that, I move previous question. I renew my motion. Please.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 96, nays, 2 present, unvoted.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. Most read series table. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 322 by Chairman White and others relative to education. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 322 for Senate Bill 274, adopted Amendments 2, 3, and 4, and passed House Bill 322 as amended.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're on this is a school safety bill we passed on the House floor 2 weeks ago, come tomorrow. The Senate added just a couple new things, which I do agree with. If you remember the part whenever a school system has to build a new building or remodel, some of the procedures we had for that, they added that also they want to add that the new remodeling or the new building have entry resistant or bullet resistant film on the windows and glass doors and on the first floor of the buildings, and they also have to have camera systems that monitor the entrances and hallways. The second part they wanted to add was it means to move the submission date of private school safety plans to October 1st, and also allow private schools to determine whether or not the students participate in the drills, and clarifies that results of the drills conducted by private schools are only required to go to local law enforcement and not Tennessee Department of Education and TDOS. Just for clarity, if you remember, there were three parts in there that the schools had to have an an armed intruder drill, an incident command drill, and a bus safety. It said that the students need to be present in the armed intruder and not necessarily present in the incident command and the bus safety. And we're letting the private schools determine whether or not they can be present, students present or not. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I concur with Senate Amendments number 2, 3, and 4.
Chairman White moves to concur in Senate Amendments 2, 3, and 4, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendments? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, sponsor, and for the amendments also from the Senate version. But again, I think these are not addressing the issues that a lot of parents and people in our community are here about today as it relates to making our community safer and making our schools safer. Yesterday, I had the opportunity, along with other colleagues, to meet parents at Covenant. And one of the things they said that this legislation and these amendments don't address is what happens when their children are on playgrounds. There's no locks there. This legislation is a false solution to a real problem of an epidemic of gun violence and a proliferation of weapons of war in our communities. And this legislation isn't holistically addressing the experiences of the children in our schools in a way that would actually make them safer, because it doesn't deal with the root issue, which isn't having more bulletproof windows, as the Senate amendment says, or having locked doors and new public infrastructure that will sponsor. That isn't it. It's the fact that human beings and individuals can have access to assault weapons and weapons of war in our communities. And that's what we need to be addressing.
Chairman White.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Much appreciated. Renew my motion.
Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? There's objection. We're voting. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 72, 23 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Amendments 2, 3, and 4, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 86, 11 nays.
Senate Amendment 2, 3, and 4 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. The most reconsidered table. Call up next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 413 by Leader Lamberth and others relative to probation and parole. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 413 for Senate Bill 495, adopted Amendment 1, passed House Bill 413 as amended.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment number 1.
Leader Lamberth moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, any objection? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Leader, would you explain the amendment for me? Would you explain that amendment?
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So the amendment that the Senate put on would allow for law enforcement officers that have a certain amount of experience to be able to be hired as probation officers without fitting other criteria because of their experience. There was a broader provision in there that would allow virtually anyone that had armed forces experience to be able to do the same thing. And I'm assuming the other body did not feel like all of those experiences matched up as well with what just law enforcement experiences are for purposes of becoming a probation officer. The way we first put the bill forward would have, but the main goal was to try to at least expand the amount of folks that can be probation officers. This does it, not quite as far as I'd like to, but it at least gets the job done.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Barrett, aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 96, no nays, one present, not voting.
Senate Amendment 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. Most reconsidered table. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 988 by Representative Beck relative to landlord and tenant. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate refused to recede from its adoption of Amendment number 1.
Representative Beck, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to refuse to recede from the actions of the House in non-concurring in the Senate Amendment number 1, and the conference committee be appointed
to confer on like committees from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies.
Representative Beck moves to refuse to receive from our action and non-concur in Senate Amendment Number 1, and that a conference committee be appointed to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies. Properly seconded. Without objection, motion carries. I appoint the following members: Representative Beck, Representative Whitson, Representative Hawk, Representative Farmer, Representative Love. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1217 by Chairman Zachary relative to public funds and financing. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 1217 for Senate Bill 1459, adopted amendments 1 and 2, and passed House Bill 1217 as amended.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to non-concur in Senate Amendment Number 1 and 2.
Without objection, we non-concur. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1342 by Representative Vaughn relative to economic and community development. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate refused to receive from its adoption of amendments 1 and 2.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I move to refuse to receive from our action and non-concurrent in Senate Amendments Number 1 and 2, and that you appoint a conference committee to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between our two bodies.
Chairman Vaughn moves to refuse to receive from our action and non-concurring in Senate Amendment Number 1 and 2, and that a conference committee be appointed to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies. Properly seconded. Without objection, motion carries. I appoint the following members: Representatives Vaughn, Vital, Todd, and Shaw. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the message calendar.
Representative Hardaway, for what purpose?
Thank you, Speaker. I want to ask Chairman Vaughn if that's the bill with the Orange Mound Industrial Development Corporation.
Representative Vaughn.
To my beloved colleague from Shelby County, I would ask that a conference committee of he and I step outside to resolve that difference.
Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, I would make a motion at this juncture that we stand in recess until 2:30 today.
Without objection, we're in recess till 2:30 p.m. today.